Chapter 1187, Obtaining the Divine Fluid from Amidst an Army of Thousands. More and more powerful cultivators appeared, and they all unleashed their most powerful abilities. Only 8 of the people present had reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier, though Hu Feiyun wasn't participating in the battle. Theoretically speaking, these 7 people would be the most powerful individuals here. However, this was only in theory. Meanwhile, there were many more people who had severed their own cultivation. In fact, there were over 100 of them. Their power was no weaker than that of the 7 king tiers, and their battle prowess was also immensely impressive. This was in no small part due to the fact that they had been at the Sun-Moon tier before, which meant that they had already grasped more powerful regulations of heaven and earth. There was no need for all of them to team up, however, as just a group of 10 such cultivators would be enough to trouble Shenjue, Shirangua, and the other young king tiers. The young king tiers would have to wait until the effects of the forbidden pills wore off before they could counterattack and suppress these elderly cultivators. With these 100 or so people joining the battle, chaos instantly ensued. However, Shenjue, Shirangua, and the others still displayed their impressive might. Although everyone's power was similar, this didn't mean that everyone's battle prowess was also similar. In addition to power, one's battle prowess would also depend on the techniques that they practiced. King tiers were king tiers. Among those who possessed similar cultivation levels, the battle prowess of king tier prodigies was a level above everyone else. Apart from Wuxia, who was slightly weaker, the other 5 king tiers were all in the thick of the action. They attacked each other and fought over the drop of thousand source true fluid as they blasted everyone else aside. Beat it! An elder reached over to push Ling Han away. Power that was close to the Sun-Moon tier fluctuated over, and this was the strongest power that this mystery realm could contain. At least, this was the case for outsiders. They would be targeted by the restriction if their power exceeded this level. As such, this level of power was almost invincible. You're already so old, yet you still speak in such an impolite manner. You truly deserve a beating. Ling Han humphed, retrieving his divine demon sword and unleashing the lightning sword technique. What? The elder let out a muffled groan as he was sent flying by Ling Han's sword strike. His expression changed drastically. That strike had been far too quick, and he had barely been able to see the trajectory of the sword light before he had been struck. Moreover, the destructive power of that strike was also incredible. It had ripped through his origin power defenses and cut deep into his flesh. Gasp! If they fought head-on, he would definitely be cut into pieces after 10 or so exchanges. Impossible. That strike was quick, yet it was still insanely powerful. How can these 2 qualities exist at the same time? This thought had barely left his mind when Ling Han had already charged past him. Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han unleashed several more strikes, and many more cultivators were sent flying into the distance. Beads of cold sweat dripped down the elder's forehead. He felt that he would never be able to understand this sword strike, no matter how many times he saw it in action. He was definitely no match for Ling Han, unless he grew much stronger, or unless they had a crushing advantage in numbers. If he faced Ling Han alone, he would lose in a very short amount of time. Ling Han cut through the crowd of fighting cultivators, and he became the 7th young king tier of this location. From the perspective of others, he could rank 6th among the 7 king tiers as he was evidently stronger than Wuxia. This was because Wuxia didn't enjoy a significant advantage over the older generation of cultivators. Damn it! The cultivators who had been sent flying were enraged, and they all launched counterattacks at Ling Han as if in tacit understanding. All kinds of dazzling lights and divine patterns streaked through the air toward Ling Han. Ling Han laughed loudly and borrowed the power of their attacks to increase his speed. Pung! He was like a human cannonball, and he instantly sent the dozen or so people in front of him flying. He had the power of several elites behind him, and thus the force of this collision was absolutely devastating. Pung, 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 pung. The crowd separated like scattering flowers as everyone stumbled to the side. Ling Han was unscathed, and he continued to charge forward. The surrounding cultivators were all stunned. What kind of fighting technique is this? Are you a fucking human weapon? Could the situation have been any crazier? Ling Han had been struck by a barrage of attacks, yet he had actually taken advantage of their momentum to increase his speed and knock others aside. His defenses were downright freakish. Who could injure him? Ling Han had already charged into the core area of the battle. This was the battleground of He Tao, Shenzhuer, and the others. They continued to fight over that drop of divine fluid, yet none of them was able to successfully obtain it. There was an endless collision of powers, and this caused the divine fluid to continuously jump through the air. Humph! Shenzhuer and the 4 other king tiers were all extremely displeased upon seeing another competitor appear. They didn't hold back as they started launching attacks at Ling Han. Although they had already made an agreement to cooperate at the end and open a treasure storage together, they would still be competitors before that. It was just that they had a bottom line: they definitely wouldn't kill any of the other 6 king tiers. Ling Han laughed heartily and completely ignored the attacks of the other 5 king tiers. He extended his hand toward that drop of 1000 source true fluid. He had a freakish physique, so he could do as he pleased. Pung, 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 pung. Countless attacks roared toward Ling Han, yet he didn't even attempt to block them. The furious attacks tore his clothes to shreds, and then left a few blood marks on his skin. Fuck. The king tiers attacked him together, yet they only left some blood marks on his skin? Everyone was transfixed in shock. Meanwhile, Ling Han took advantage of their hesitation to grab the drop of 1000 source true fluid and place it into his black tower. Hand it over, the 5 king tiers shouted as they attacked him. Hurry up and hand it over. The older generation of elites outside the core area of battle also launched attacks at him. Attacks rained down on Ling Han, and it was as if the sky were about to collapse. It was a petrifying scene. Ling Han was too lazy to even block them, and he simply crossed his arms before his chest. The attacks crashed down, and the divine patterns that were intertwined within them radiated with a brilliant glow. These attacks were all near the level of the Sun-Moon tier, and even elites at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier would be horrified if they were to face such a violent barrage of attacks. They definitely wouldn't dare to face it head-on. However, Ling Han remained where he was and calmly allowed the attacks to hit him. Boom! The earth shook, and shock waves swept into the surroundings. Clouds of dust billowed into the air. Ling Han was sent flying, yet when he landed, everyone was shocked to discover that he had only received some minor, superficial wounds. Not a single one of his bones had been broken, and he definitely hadn't been smashed into a pulp. You guys want me to hand the divine fluid over? Then show me that you're powerful enough to take it. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, Come on, I don't mind playing around with you people. You're the target of so many elites, yet this is just a simple game to you. You're far too arrogant. However, they had to admit that his physique was indeed monstrous. Him being able to survive the barrage of attacks just then was proof. He had been hit by over 100 attacks, yet he had walked out of it as if nothing had happened. That being the case, who could still pose a threat to him? The 5 king tiers were the first to stop attacking Ling Han. The other cultivators gradually stopped attacking him as well. There was no point attacking him any further. It was impossible to snatch that drop of 1000 source true fluid from him. Done? Ling Han asked with a beaming smile. He sat down where he stood. Why aren't you leaving? Someone asked in an interrogative tone. According to the standard convention, those who obtained a drop of 1000 source true fluid would immediately leave. After all, it was far too dangerous to remain. If one remained, they would be ganged up on by others, and it would be impossible to withstand the endless waves of attacks. Moreover, those who could obtain a drop of thousand source true fluid were definitely very powerful. Once they left, there would effectively be one less powerful competitor. As such, this would also be beneficial to others. Leaving after obtaining a drop of divine fluid was the standard convention. Why must I leave? Ling Han asked with a smile. His physique was invincible, so he could naturally stay to fight for more thousand source true fluid. Anyhow, there was no rule mandating that one had to leave after obtaining a single drop of divine fluid. Chapter 1188, 3 Drops. Everyone was enraged. This brat had already obtained a drop of thousand source true fluid, yet he still wanted to fight for a second drop? Ever since this Yellow Spring Mystery Realm had opened, only one person had ever obtained 2 drops of thousand source true fluid at once: Yang Hao. Yang Hao had been a king tier among king tiers at that time, and he had suppressed all of the prodigies in his generation. Those of the old generation could only look up in awe as well. It was because of this that he was able to obtain 2 drops of thousand source true fluid. However, could this brat compare to Yang Hao? What a joke! Prodigies like Yang Hao would only appear once every 1 million years. When he reached the Mountain River tier, people were certain that he would definitely reach the Heavenly Body tier. What other prodigy could compare to him? However, the cultivators genuinely had no clue how to deal with Ling Han's freakish physique. Although there were numerous people here, they all had their own agendas, and they were all here for their own benefits. How could they truly work together? However, if they were to battle one-on-one, who here apart from the 6 king tiers would be a match for Ling Han? Thus, the cultivators quickly suppressed their anger. They sat down to rest and meditate that they could recover to their peak condition. This way, they could compete for the second drop of thousand source true fluid. One day quickly passed by. Sun and moon crossed paths, and the second drop of thousand source true fluid started to form. It gradually grew larger, and eventually rolled off the eagle beak under the force of gravity. Xiao. It fluttered with the wind as it drifted down the cliff's face. It's mine. Not only did the older generation of elites start to move, but those who had reached the consummate level of the Mountain River tier also dashed over to try their luck. After all, thousand source true fluid was incredibly valuable. For those who were stuck at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier, ingesting a drop of thousand source true fluid would perhaps help them open the door to the Sun-Moon tier. After reaching the Sun-Moon tier, their lifespan of 400,000 years would increase to 1 million years. This was an astonishing increase. To say nothing of strength, just this increase in lifespan was worth risking their lives for. The surroundings instantly descended into chaos. Ling Han carefully picked a direction before explosively leaping forward. Pang! He soared into the sky, and those around him were all sent sprawling. He charged toward the second drop of thousand source true fluid. You dare? He had already obtained a drop of divine fluid, and thus his choice to stay and fight for a second drop naturally made him the common enemy of the people. Countless attacks rushed toward him. Not only was he attacked by the elders who had severed their cultivation, but he was even attacked by some who were only at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier. A cold glint flashed past Ling Han's eyes. He had held back and avoided killing people before, and by the looks of it, these people had become convinced that he was a soft-hearted pushover. Even consummate-level cultivators dared to attack him without fear and restraint. One had to realize that in the cultivation world, he who possessed a higher cultivation level was senior. Humph! Ling Han brandished his divine demon sword, causing divine patterns to materialize, and murderous aura to soar into the sky. This was a weapon whose material had the potential to evolve into divine metal. Although it hadn't reached that level yet, its quality was still incredible. Shwa, shwa, shwa. Sword light flashed through the air, and severed limbs flew through the surroundings. Jets of blood sprayed into the sky. Han Lin, how ruthless of you. I'm a disciple of the majestic heaven sect. This person had lost a hand, and they were wild with fury as they shrieked at Ling Han. Ling Han had already dashed past that person. However, when he heard their angry scream, he especially turned around to charge back over. Humph! Did you hold back when you attacked me? Since you dared to provoke me, you should have been prepared to suffer my fury. His sword slashed down, and that person was instantly cut into two, both his body and his divine sense annihilated. You guys want to obstruct me? No problem. However, use your bum and ponder whether you have the strength to block me. Ling Han said in a menacing voice. Coupled with the dozens of corpses around him, his words seemed especially threatening and domineering. The other cultivators all frowned in anger. Use their bums to think? Was he comparing their brains to their bums? Was there really a need to degrade them like that? However, the ground was littered with fresh corpses, so who dared to protest? Respect was earned through battling and killing. After killing dozens of cultivators to demonstrate his strength, the others finally didn't dare to underestimate him any longer. He was also a young king tier. Moreover, he was more terrifying than Shenjue and the 5 other king tiers combined because he possessed an invincible physique. At least, it was invincible in this mystery realm. Ling Han continued to barge toward the 1,000-source true fluid. Meanwhile, just like before, it was the other 5 king tiers who occupied the core area of the battle. They were fighting over the 1,000-source true fluid, though it wasn't as if the others didn't have a chance. If the 1,000-source true fluid were struck and sent flying into the distance, perhaps some lucky person who was standing there would be able to easily obtain it and then flee. It's you again. Shenjue and the others all grimaced upon seeing Ling Han. Heh, how are you all doing? Ling Han asked with a smile. How am I doing my A*S? It's only been a day, and we've all been standing here around each other. Is there any need to ask how we're doing? Go! The 5 king tiers attacked Ling Han in unison. None of them was weaker than Ling Han. In fact, their power was even above that of Ling Han. However, anyone who unleashed power at the Sun-Moon tier would be targeted by the restrictions of this mystery realm. Thus, Shenjue and the others had to suppress their power such that it didn't cross the boundary to the Sun-Moon tier. Ling Han unleashed his lightning sword technique, only attacking and not defending. He took full advantage of his freakish physique. No one could outlast someone who had terrifying offensive abilities and invincible defensive abilities. After battling for a while, Ling Han charged through their attacks and obtained the second drop of 1,000-source true fluid. Everyone's expression changed drastically. This brat was taking things too far. He had already obtained 2 drops of 1,000-source true fluid. Moreover, by the looks of it, he could still obtain the 3rd, the 4th. He had the ability to obtain all 10 drops. Even Yang Haoth King tier of King tiers had only managed to obtain 2 drops of 1,000-source true fluid. Ling Han was already on equal standing with Yang Hao at this moment. In fact, there was a significant chance that he would end up overtaking him. Was an even more terrifying prodigy going to appear? Everyone's expression darkened, and a few older generation cultivators gathered together to discuss something. Yang Hao had been able to obtain 2 drops of divine fluid, but hadn't been able to obtain 3. Why was this? Being able to obtain 2 drops proved that his battle prowess was definitely impressive. So, why hadn't he been able to obtain 3 drops? This was because Yang Hao had become the target of everyone after obtaining his second drop of divine fluid. Regardless of how freakishly prodigious he was, he still couldn't endure becoming the enemy of everyone else. Right now, the more elderly cultivators were starting to suggest that everyone work together to attack Ling Han. Ling Han's physique was indeed invincible, but his power was not. Thus, they could trap him in some location and stop him from fighting for the divine fluid. However, this pertained the division of benefits. Those responsible for trapping Ling Han would clearly be forsaking their opportunity to fight for the divine fluid. As such, who was willing to take this role? The third day rolled around, and another drop of divine fluid appeared. The surroundings descended into chaos again, and this was especially beneficial to Ling Han. Attacks streaked through the air, and the cultivators had no choice but to dodge and weave. However, Ling Han could ignore them and walk straight through them. Thus, he was able to obtain the third drop of Thousand Source True Fluid with ease. It's his third drop. The others couldn't tolerate this anymore, and they formed a special alliance to target Ling Han. When the fourth drop of divine fluid appeared, half of the older generation cultivators turned their attention to Ling Han. In addition to them, 3 of the young king tiers also targeted Ling Han. They trapped Ling Han where he was while the remaining cultivators fought over the fourth drop of Thousand Source True Fluid. Chapter 1189, Hand over the Divine Fluid. Ling Han was very strong, very, very strong. However, even he couldn't break through the encirclement that consisted of dozens of pseudo-Sun Moon tier elites and 3 young king tiers. He was trapped all the way until someone managed to obtain the drop of Thousand Source True Fluid. Only then did those trapping him retreat. When the 5th drop of divine fluid appeared, the other half of cultivators came over to trap him. Meanwhile, the half that had trapped him the previous day charged over to fight for the divine fluid. Ling Han was stunned. He had actually become the enemy of everyone. Fuck. You people are far too shameless. However, in a more distant location, those who were too weak to participate in the fights for the divine fluid all admired Ling Han immensely. He was just a single person, yet he was powerful enough to force all of the other elites to team up and target him. In fact, they had sent half of the cultivators to trap him. Moreover, even the young king tiers had joined the alliance. What did this say about Ling Han's strength? Even Yang Hao hadn't received such special treatment, had been forced to retreat after being attacked by everyone. Ling Han had already surpassed Yang Hao, at least in the Mountain River tier. In fact, one could claim that he was the strongest Mountain River tier cultivator in history. The 6th drop, 7th drop. The elites continued to rotate their roles, and Ling Han was confined to where he stood. Although they could only cause him minor wounds, the sheer number of cultivators meant that Ling Han was unable to move anywhere. How irritating. Why have you people suddenly become so united? Ling Han was extremely ticked off. However, the cultivators didn't give him a chance, and they continued to rotate in their roles. When the 10th drop of divine fluid appeared, however, those who were responsible for trapping him abandoned their responsibilities. This was because there would be no 11th drop of divine fluid. If they kept their eyes on Ling Han, they would lose this final opportunity to obtain a drop of divine fluid. Chaos descended once again. Ling Han laughed heartily. This was exactly what he wanted. He charged toward the divine fluid, and he was able to hack an older generation cultivator aside with each strike of his sword. If he came across a young king tier, he would simply charge through their attacks. After a period of intense battle, Ling Han successfully obtained a 4th drop of Thousand Source True Fluid. He had created a new record. He, a single person, had obtained almost half of the available divine fluid. This was an absolute miracle. Perhaps this was a record that would never be broken. As long as this mystery realm remained, people would mention Ling Han's feat whenever they talked about Thousand Source True Fluid. Anyhow, it was impossible to snatch the divine fluid from Ling Han. Who could crack his defenses? Even the power of decrees was limited in this place. As such, Ling Han's defenses were truly invincible. Thus, the cultivators merely looked at him deeply before marching off into the distance. Meanwhile, many of them pondered whether they shouldn't become acquainted with him. He was a rising prodigy, and his accomplishments in the future definitely wouldn't be below those of Yang Hao. Brother Ling, we'll meet at the promised location. Shen Zhuer, He Tao, and the others also left. King tiers were king tiers, after all. Apart from Wuxia, the other 5 king tiers had each obtained a drop of 1000 source true fluid. This was a reflection of their strength. However, Wuxia had only just reached the pinnacle level a short while ago, so his strength was far below that of the others. As such, he hadn't managed to obtain anything. Anyhow, the 6 king tiers combined had only managed to obtain one more drop of 1000 source true fluid than Ling Han. Thus, they naturally paled in comparison to him. Ling Han nodded at them in reply. Them fighting over the divine fluid was a separate matter from them cooperating to open the treasure storage. Ling Han welcomed friendly competition as long as underhanded tactics weren't used. Han Lin. 8 people appeared, 7 of whom were very young. One of them was an Eldarin elite who had severed his own cultivation. He had ingested a forbidden pill at this moment, and thus his power was almost at the Sun-Moon tier. A formidable aura radiated from his body. In fact, this was already as a result of him suppressing his own power. Otherwise, his power would definitely reach the Sun-Moon tier. If that were the case, his battle prowess would undergo a qualitative change. Why did people say that those with a power of 9 stars couldn't battle against Sun-Moon tier elites? Why did they need to possess a power of 10 stars? This was because this 1-star difference signified a dramatic difference in strength. If one didn't reach 10 stars, they could only be called pseudo-Sun-Moon tier elites. "You've done very well," the elder said, an arrogant expression on his face. "Who are you people? You make it seem as if we're familiar, and you're even speaking as if you're my senior. That's a little too shameless, don't you think? Young master is very satisfied with you," the elder continued. "Now, you can hand the 3 drops of 1000 source true fluid to me." Oh, so they're people from the Gao faction. Ling Han finally understood the situation. No wonder they felt so good about themselves. They were the subordinates of Gao Huang. He couldn't help but chuckle, and say, "Do you guys have brains? Why must I hand the divine fluid over to you?" The elder humphed, and said, "Han Lin, don't think that you're invincible in this mystery realm. If I unleash my true might, your measly power won't be able to stop me." Gao Huang had only been making a casual remark when he said that he wanted Ling Han to obtain 3 drops of 1000 source true fluid. In reality, he would have been satisfied even if Ling Han were only able to obtain a single drop. However, who knew that Ling Han was so freakish? He had actually managed to obtain 4 drops of divine fluid. Even the elder could barely believe this. The elder was called Shi Ming, and he was a senior member of the Gao faction. He had entered this Yellow Spring mystery realm several times, though he had never managed to obtain a drop of 1000 source true fluid. If he were able to return with 3 drops this time, he would naturally have made a great contribution. He had no future to speak of, had already severed his own cultivation, but he still had many descendants. If he were able to make such a large contribution, they would probably be looked after well by the Gao faction. In fact, they would have an incredibly bright future in front of them. For the sake of his descendants, he had to force Ling Han to submit. Ling Han smiled faintly, and asked, "Are you threatening me?" "This isn't a threat, this is the truth." Shi Ming humphed, and said, "If I unleash my true might, my battle prowess will advance to the Sun-Moon tier. It's just that I might also be killed if I wield such power here." "Oh, are you saying that you're not afraid of death?" Ling Han asked. Shi Ming laughed loudly, and said, "Who isn't afraid of death? However, I'm willing to fight to the death." "But, are you?" He had already placed all of his hopes in his descendants. Thus, he was willing to die in order to pave a smooth path for them. Ling Han sighed, and said, "I've just realized that you're fairly pitiful. You've been a dog and a servant all your life, and you've never been able to live for yourself. Don't change the topic." Shi Ming pointed at Ling Han, and said, "Immediately hand over 3 drops of divine fluid." I'll allow you to keep a drop for yourself. You're still young, and you have many more chances to enter this place. In fact, you can enter many other ancient sites. There's no need to lose your life here. Ling Han shook his head with a smile, and said, since when did bandits become so understanding? However, it's a pity that you can't change your nature as a bandit no matter what you say. Since you're so stubborn. Shi Ming took a deep breath as a resolute expression appeared on his face. He was going to unleash power at the Sun-Moon tier to suppress Ling Han, even if this meant being targeted by the restrictions of this mystery realm. He was willing to die to achieve his aims. I'll send you on your way. Boom! Shi Ming unleashed an attack, and power at the Sun-Moon tier surged into the surroundings. Over 100 intertwining divine patterns instantly materialized in the air. This was a qualitative change. Even those at the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier could only wield 99 divine patterns. Only those who had advanced to the Sun-Moon tier could wield over 100 divine patterns. The only difference was that there was a qualitative difference between divine patterns at the Mountain River tier and divine patterns at the Sun-Moon tier. Meanwhile, divine patterns at the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier were identical in quality to those at the Sun-Moon tier. The complexity and power of divine patterns were determined by the regulations of heaven and earth. The higher one's tier, the higher the quality of their divine patterns. Chapter 1190, Despicable Ginseng's Offer. Shi Ming unleashed his full battle prowess, not caring that he would be targeted by the restrictions of the mystery realm. He regained his might as an elite at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. In this mystery realm, this was definitely an invincible power. Pang! Ling Han was sent flying by Shi Ming's strike. He felt extreme discomfort, and it was as if his insides were churning. Although he possessed a power of 9 stars and was only a tad away from reaching 10 stars, this tiny distance was like an insurmountable gulf. A power of 9 stars still belonged to the Mountain River tier, while a power of 10 stars had already advanced to the Sun-Moon tier. As freakish as Ling Han was, he still couldn't make up for the gulf in power between the Mountain River tier and the Sun-Moon tier. He was simply no match for Sun-Moon tier elites. This time, he didn't have any lion seal to use. Anyhow, he wouldn't dare to use a lion seal even if he did still have one. The restriction here targeted anyone who possessed power at the Sun-Moon tier, and he certainly didn't want to be targeted. In any case, it mattered little that Shi Ming possessed power at the Sun-Moon tier. His power was only at the low extreme, and as such, the most it could do was cause Ling Han to spit some blood. If he wanted to truly threaten Ling Han, he would need power at the medium extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. Ling Han crawled up as if nothing had happened. He then dusted himself off with a smile, and said, "You really are a bit more powerful than before. However, that's still not enough to injure me." Fuck. Shi Ming was so shocked that his eyes almost popped out from his head. Ling Han had taken his full power attack just like that? That was the attack of a Sun-Moon tier elite. It should have been powerful enough to kill any Mountain River tier cultivator. However, why couldn't it deal with Ling Han? Freak. He's definitely a freak. Aya. Shi Ming wailed in agony. After launching a Sun-Moon tier attack, he was immediately targeted by the restriction of this mystery realm. Pu. Blood exploded from all parts of his body, and he instantly became a bloody figure. However, the pain helped him come to his senses, and he glared at Ling Han with a venomous look. Killing intent oozed from his body. He was going to kill this prodigy, he was going to pave a smooth path for his descendants. Die. He was drenched in blood as he launched another attack at Ling Han. He combusted his blood essence to fight against the attacks of the restriction, and this allowed him to still have enough power to suppress Ling Han. Ling Han shook his head. Apart from himself, no one else knew just how powerful his physique was. Shi Ming wanted to kill him with power at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. It wasn't enough. Ling Han unsheathed his divine demon sword, and it radiated with a brilliant glow as he battled against Shi Ming. Pung! 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 Shi Ming was able to send Ling Han flying with every attack that he unleashed. This was due to his crushing advantage in cultivation level. However, the most these attacks could do was cause Ling Han to vomit a few mouthfuls of blood. Meanwhile, Shi Ming's own situation was far direr. The attacks from the restriction continued to wound his internal organs, godly bones, and meridians. Pa! During the 20th exchange, he threw a fist at Ling Han. However, his entire arm exploded into a cloud of blood and bone shards. The power of Sun-Moon tier elites was far too powerful, however, and thus this cloud of blood and bone shards still possessed a devastating destructive ability. A few members of the Gao faction were standing nearby, and they were instantly smashed into bits by the cloud of blood and bones. Only one person managed to survive, with the others all being insta-killed. However, Shi Ming had already lost all ability to reason. There was only a single thought running through his mind at this moment, and that was to kill Ling Han. Thus, he attacked Ling Han without restraint, not caring that his body was already on the verge of collapse. Pa! His other arm also exploded, and he became an armless person. However, he still didn't stop, and he raised his legs to kick at Ling Han. Pa! Pa! It wasn't long before his legs also exploded into clouds of blood and bone. However, he exhaled a breath of air and sent his body crashing toward Ling Han. His expression was as if he wanted to drag Ling Han down with him. Ling Han almost felt a hint of sympathy for him. Should he pity or detest such a person? Pa! He didn't need to attack, and the restriction of the mystery realm ripped Shi Ming's body into pieces. However, his eyes were still fixed on Ling Han. He was going to launch one final attack. However, he never got around to doing so, because his brain also exploded into a cloud of blood and gore. Those at the Sun-Moon tier could already be referred to as elites. However, Shi Ming had died just like that. In fact, he didn't even have a full corpse. The sole remaining member of the Gao faction almost wet his pants in fright, and he trembled in terror as he turned around to flee. This place was far too dangerous. He was going to flee straight to the entrance, where he could wait for Venerable Trinity to reopen the mystery realm. He didn't want to stay in this place for 1 second longer. Ling Han shook his head as he sheathed his sword. He then walked toward Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun. He would feel some pleasure when he crushed profligate disciples. For example, he would definitely feel great when he eventually stomped on Gao Huang's face. However, his encounter with Shi Ming could only make him sigh with emotion. His mood also became a little heavy. There's no need to feel sympathetic toward such kinds of people, though there's also no need to hate them. Ling Han rid his mind of these thoughts. He then smiled at Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun, and said, "Let's go." Ling Han, you're so strong. Hu Feiyun was biting into a fruit, so her words were a little unclear. Her blood had been churning in excitement when she watched Ling Han charge in and out of the enemies. Her admiration for him was immense. Ling Han laughed loudly, and replied, "Of course." His mood became a little better. The three of them walked for a while when Ling Han suddenly sensed danger. He instantly thrust his sword toward the ground. Pooh! Sword light shot into the earth, and a web of cracks instantly appeared on the ground. Fuck your entire family. You almost skewered my A*S. A white shadow dashed out from the ground, and shouted, "Eat your grandpa's ginseng foot." Shwa! The white shadow instantly shot toward Ling Han. It was the despicable Ginseng. He truly came and went like a shadow. He had planned to ambush Ling Han, yet unfortunately for him, Ling Han had cast his divine sense to monitor the surroundings. Not only had he failed his ambush, but he had even been attacked by Ling Han first. Moreover, Ling Han had been extremely close to hitting him. Ling Han unleashed his fast technique on the old Ginseng. "You're still 10,000 years too young to kill your Ginseng grandpa," the old Ginseng shouted in a strange voice. His reaction was extremely quick, and he transformed the power of regulations into sabers, spears, and arrows before shooting them toward Ling Han. "Didn't you say I was 800 years too young last time?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Hey! It's because I've become stronger." The old Ginseng weaved through sky and earth at an astonishing speed. Ling Han humphed, and said, "Hurry up and jump into my bowl. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. You dare to threaten me? Watch how I stomp you to death." The old Ginseng flared up in rage, and his attacks rained down even thicker and faster. Ling Han didn't hold back anymore. Boom! Terrifying flames burst from his body, and divine patterns intertwined in the air. "Fuck! I hate fire the most," the old Ginseng wailed. He instantly scampered dozens of meters back, finally stopping his attacks. He wore a fearful expression as he stared at the flames. Although he was quick, the might of ice and divine flame could still restrain him. "Despicable Ginseng, why did you appear again?" Ling Han asked. The old Ginseng plopped onto a stone and crossed his legs. His attitude seemed smug, and he said, "I want to give you an opportunity." "Pooh! Are you fucking kidding me?" Ling Han smiled, and said, "Oh. What opportunity might this be? Perhaps you want to donate your body? Then hurry up and come to my bowl." The old Ginseng instantly jumped up, and shouted, "Pay, pay, pay. I'm not interested in men. Don't even think about taking my A**s." Ling Han shook his head. This despicable Ginseng had grown up in this mystery realm, so how had he developed such a **TTY personality? Could scoundrels also be born like that? "I'll give you some divine fluid if you take me out of this mystery realm." The old Ginseng made Ling Han an offer. Chapter 1191, 10 Ginseng Roots. "Oh?" Ling Han was slightly surprised, and he asked, "Why do I have to take you out? You have your own legs, don't you? Not only that, but you're also as quick as the wind. Foolish human, don't you know that there are people standing guard outside? A few of them are incredibly powerful too. If I leave by myself, I'll definitely be captured and made into a stew," the old Ginseng said. You actually know that there are powerful elites outside?" Ling Han clapped his hands, and said, "Oh, I see. You were already waiting by the entrance when the mystery realm opened. You had wanted to leave, yet you discovered that there were Heavenly Body Tier and Eternal River Tier elites standing guard outside. You became afraid. That being the case, it was very likely that this despicable Ginseng had set his eyes on him since a long time ago. Although I'm excellent at fleeing, I'm still fairly fearful of those bastards outside." The old Ginseng didn't mince his words, and continued, "I know that you have a treasure on you, one that can hold living beings. Let me hide in it for a while. Once I get out, I'll reward you with supreme divine fluid." Ling Han gazed at the old Ginseng, and he involuntarily recalled the sight of him drooling while he had been leering at the big breasts of Shenjuer. His expression darkened, and he said, "The supreme divine fluid that you speak of, isn't your drool, right? Although that could indeed be classified as treasure fluid, it was still nowhere near the level of divine fluid." The old Ginseng flushed red in embarrassment, and coughed before saying, "I received the fortune of heaven and earth, and my entire body is full of treasures. Do you think anyone can receive my drool? This old sleazebag." The repayment for helping him escape this mystery realm was some of his saliva? Was he fucking trying to humiliate him? Ling Han started to bargain with him, saying, "Give me half of your body, and I'll take you out." Brat, you're far too greedy. You actually want to cut me in half? The old ginseng jumped up and down in rage. Eat my treasured ginseng foot. See how I stomp you to your senses. The human and ginseng started to fight again. However, they stopped after exchanging a few blows. I'll give you 1 strand of my root, tops, the old ginseng said. 100 strands. Ling Han made an exorbitant demand. Fuck off. I only have 37 roots in total. There won't be enough even if I pluck all of them for you, the old ginseng shouted. Then I'll settle for 37, Ling Han said in an understanding voice. The old ginseng shook his head, and said, in your dreams. 2 max. They continued to bargain. In the end, they settled on 10 roots. That's right, what breed are you? Ling Han asked with a smile. *TTY brat, you dare to insult me? The old ginseng launched a kick at Ling Han. Ling Han blocked with his hand. He then nodded, and said, I can guess even if you don't tell me. You're either a perverted ginseng, or you're an unvirtuous ginseng. You're making me so mad. The old ginseng jumped around in rage, and then said, Brat, make a Tao oath. A Tao oath was when someone made an oath to the great Tao of heaven and earth. There existed an intangible will of heaven, and if one didn't keep their Tao oath, they would be punished by heaven and earth. Going against a Tao oath was a massive taboo. No one dared to do this. Ling Han nodded, and then made a Tao oath. This was an oath to heaven and earth, so he couldn't escape his liability even if he disguised his identity. The old ginseng finally relaxed upon seeing this. He jumped onto Ling Han's shoulder, and said, Brat, you're fairly lucky. You managed to win the hearts of 2 beautiful girls. This old ginseng was becoming perverted again. Ling Han shook his head. This old ginseng came and went as he pleased, and he had even managed to discover his black tower. He had most likely observed him for a long time, and only appeared on the medicinal mountain upon approving his character. Perverted ginseng, when did you achieve Tao? Also, why do you want to leave this place? I engulfed the essence of heaven and earth, and I obtained the vital energy of sun and moon. Ling Han hurriedly interrupted, and said, Stop, stop, stop. Stop bragging and cut to the chase. The old ginseng was extremely displeased. Why couldn't he brag for a while? He mumbled for a while before finally telling his tale. Several tens of thousands of years ago, he gained a blurry awareness. He had instinctively absorbed the vital energy of heaven and earth, and thus started to cultivate. However, he had only managed to grow arms and legs during the past several million or so years. This allowed him to escape from the ground and travel around the lands. However, this mystery realm was relatively small. Moreover, the more regulations that he mastered, the more that this mystery realm would target him and made him suffer from backlashes. As a result, he urgently wanted to escape. However, even though this mystery realm opened twice every 100 years, once for people to enter and once for people to leave, the outside was filled with elites. Thus, he didn't dare to leave lest he be made into a ginseng stew by the people outside. This time, however, he had no choice but to leave. He had a feeling that this was his last chance to leave. Even if he could survive the next 100 years, he would be erased and killed by this mystery realm. Ling Han slapped his thigh, and said, If I had known this earlier, I would have been more aggressive in my bargaining. Ha! You're still 20,000 years too young to contend with your ginseng grandpa. There was a smug smile on the old ginseng's face. Ling Han chuckled upon hearing this. Fortunately for the old ginseng, Hunyo wasn't here. Otherwise, his smugness would probably lead to him being stuffed into a pot and cooked into a stew. The old ginseng shuddered, and said, Brat, can you wipe that creepy smile off your face? I'm getting goosebumps just looking at you. How can you get goosebumps? Hu Feiyun asked curiously. The old Ginseng shot an annoyed look at her, and said, "Little girl, it's a figure of speech, understand? You don't look too young, so why are you still so stupid?" Ling Han shook his head, and said, "Your mouth is so toxic, you're bound to suffer one day. Pay. Your Ginseng grandpa is transcendent above the 9 heavens and 10 lands. Once I leave this place, who can still capture me?" The old Ginseng was brimming with confidence. Ling Han grinned, and said, "I'll introduce you to someone in the future." He couldn't wait to see Hu Niu trampling all over this old Ginseng. There was no reason for this, but Ling Han instinctively believed that Hu Niu could suppress this old Ginseng. This old Ginseng was extremely lively, and he would brag and fight with Ling Han when there was no one around. He would occasionally tease Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun as well, though he would naturally end up being chased around and attacked by Ling Han. Thus, he couldn't get near Shui Yenyu or Hu Feiyun. If there were outsiders around, he would tunnel into the ground. No one here could discover him. "Brat, you're going to that final treasure storage?" The old Ginseng became serious upon learning of Ling Han's target destination, and said, "That's not a good place to be. I passed that area several times, and I felt apprehensive each time." "Oh, do you know anything about that place?" Although Ling Han possessed the Black Tower and was confident in protecting himself, the Black Tower wasn't all-powerful. It would be quite troublesome if he were to be trapped in that place. The old Ginseng shook his head, and said, "How would I know anything? That place is swirling with deathly aura, so I never attempted to near it." Ling Han pondered for a moment, but still decided to go. First of all, he had already promised the others that he would go. He couldn't go back on his promise. Second of all, he was extremely curious. After leaving the Eagle Mountain, the surrounding environment became desolate. There were scars left by battles everywhere, and the multitude of obliterated mountains revealed just how intense the battles in the past had been. That was a mountain range of the immortal realm, so just how sturdy were the mountains? However, they were completely crushed now. The person who had obliterated them was definitely supremely powerful. There were no demonic beasts, and there were no godly medicines. There was only the yellow spring that surged through the sky. Chapter 1192, Opening the Treasure Storage. There was almost no one here. Everyone knew that this was a desolate land, so who would waste their time coming here? A dark and eerie aura rose from the ground, reaching a height of around 6 meters. It continued to change into all shapes and forms, and it appeared especially uncanny. However, this aura wasn't dangerous. Ling Han had never heard about anyone dying from breathing in this aura. Is this a remnant from the great battle of the past? Ling Han said in speculation. Several more days passed, and a palace appeared before them. This palace was built at the foot of a mountain, and the origin of the yellow spring was none other than this mountain. The yellow spring flowed down from it and transformed into the river that crashed through the sky. "Why don't you two enter the Black Tower?" Ling Han said. He didn't want Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun to face any danger. Shui Yenyu nodded in understanding. From this point on, she couldn't help Ling Han any longer. Not only that, but she would even be a burden on him. Thus, it was better for her to enter the Black Tower and cultivate earnestly so that she could increase her strength. That way, she could strive to be of more help in the future. Meanwhile, Hu Feiyun was a bit reluctant to enter. She was an extremely curious person, and she was thoroughly interested in this place even though the eerie aura of the surroundings made her hair stand on ends. She didn't want to miss any of the excitement. After lots of encouragement and lies, they finally managed to convince Hu Feiyun to enter the Black Tower. "I want to enter too," the old Ginseng said. His eyes dashed about in excitement. Ling Han knew that this Ginseng was having perverted thoughts again. He wanted to tease the two women while Ling Han wasn't present. However, that was the Black Tower. And there was even a saint inside. Sure. Ling Han nodded, and said, "Stand still and don't move." He wrapped his divine sense around the old Ginseng, and then brought him into the Black Tower. If his divine sense was stronger than his targets, he wouldn't need to seek their agreement, could forcefully drag them into the Black Tower. However, the old Ginseng was astonishingly quick, so Ling Han would have no way of wrapping his divine sense around him if he didn't stand still. Fuck. What is this place? Also, what's with this tree? Why do I feel like I've met my ancient ancestor? Fuck. What's with this orb of light? It seems terrifying. Wah, hurry up and let me out. The old Ginseng was curious at first, but his curiosity quickly became astonishment, and his astonishment quickly became terror. He wailed in fright. Ling Han couldn't care less about him, and he strode toward the palace that rested at the foot of the mountain. This was the final stop of the mystery realm. He arrived at the entrance of the palace. The entrance was tightly shut, and there were already 5 people standing in front of it. Apart from Kuang Pei Shan, the other king tiers had all arrived. "Brother Ling." The 5 people all nodded at him in greeting. They didn't seem jealous of him just because he had obtained 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid. Perhaps they were, but they had hidden it deep within their hearts. King tier prodigies like them all had a firm conviction that they were invincible. Why would they need to be jealous of others? Ling Han nodded, and said, "You've all arrived fairly early." "Hee, we only arrived a short while ago," Shi Ongua said with a chuckle. A hint of apprehension flashed across his eyes as he looked at Ling Han. In terms of battle prowess alone, he had a crushing advantage over Ling Han. However, if they were to battle to the death, Ling Han would definitely emerge victorious. The reason for this was simple. Ling Han's defense was far too terrifying, and it would be impossible for him to crack it. Such opponents frightened him. Junior sister Kuang still hasn't arrived yet. She probably came across some great opportunity on her way here, Wu Wentong said. Their king tier strength meant that they were invincible in this mystery realm. Thus, there was no way that Kuang Pei Shan was late due to facing a powerful enemy. They sat down and started discussing Dao. There was nothing better for them to do anyway. As king tiers, all 6 of them had reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. As such, they were supremely talented in the field of cultivation. They all gained a lot from their discussions. After waiting for 2 days, Kuang Pei Shan finally arrived. "Righto, let's begin." There were 14 indentations on the large door of the palace, and each one was just large enough to fit a hand. The 7 of them stood side by side, and they each placed their hands into 2 indentations. "Push when I count to 3, He Tao said. The 6 other king tiers all nodded in acknowledgement. Right now, they naturally wouldn't argue about who was issuing the commands. 1, 2, 3. The 7 king tiers unleashed their full power as they pushed on the door. When their power reached 7 stars above the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, the indentations below their hands lit up. 2, 4, 6, 8. When all 14 of the indentations lit up, there was a cracking sound, and the tightly shut door of the palace slowly started to open. However, the 7 king tiers all stepped back, cautious expressions on their faces. Before this potentially astonishing treasure storage, they became even more careful than before. They didn't let greed cloud their eyes and judgment. The palace had been pitch black before. However, when the door fully opened, the columns inside started to light up one after another. After a short while, the entire palace was brightly illuminated. Gasp! The 7 king tiers all gasped in surprise. This was because a corpse was sprawled 30 or so meters before them. This person had to have been extremely tall, and they would have measured at least 9 meters in height if they were upright. Their entire body was blue, and they were dressed in a damaged suit of armor. In fact, there were gaping wounds on their body, and even their bones could be seen. There were a few lines of words carved next to the corpse. When the 7 stars align, 'tis the time my successor appears. Dark demons of the netherworld, kill them, kill them, kill them. The heaven is unjust, despicable, detestable, deplorable. He Tao pondered for a moment, and said, the 7 stars are clearly referring to us. We've all cultivated to the pinnacle level, and we had to work together to open the door to this palace. Also, my successor appears. Is this saying that one of us will receive his inheritance? Shen Zhuer took a few steps forward, and her expression suddenly changed drastically. She hurriedly retreated to her original position, and said, this senior is far too powerful. I'm not able to near him at all. It was as if a murderous aura were about to rip me into shreds. Ling Han had been squatting down before, and he stood up at this moment, and said, the tiles in this palace are also incredibly sturdy. I used my divine sword on it, but I still couldn't leave a mark. One had to realize that the words on the floor had most likely been engraved by the blue-skinned elite before he had died. Moreover, he had probably done so using his fingers. There were no weapons in his hand, and his index finger was resting on the last character of the message. Ling Han hadn't been able to leave a mark using a divine sword, yet the blue-skinned elite had been able to engrave a message using his finger. The massive gulf between them couldn't be more evident. The 7 king tiers walked around the corpse. Although this blue-skinned elite had died long ago, remnants of his might still lingered over his corpse. It was simply impossible for them to near him. Even though they were all prodigies who had reached the pinnacle level, they still appeared especially insignificant before such a mighty being. He was definitely an eternal river tier elite. Although I can't fathom the cultivation of Venerable Trinity, this senior gives off a similar feeling to him. He's definitely far above the heavenly body tier. Then his inheritance is tremendously valuable. Shen Zhuer and the others were all moved upon realizing this. How incredible would it be if they were to receive the inheritance of an eternal river tier elite? Although Venerable Trinity had also taken in 9 disciples, he would definitely withhold some of his inheritances. He would leave his most important inheritance until the end and only teach it to one of his disciples. His other disciples were destined to receive only part of his inheritance. However, the situation right now was different. This blue-skinned elite had died long ago, and thus the inheritance that he left was definitely complete. Who wouldn't be moved? Chapter 1193, A Myriad of Secret Techniques. Numerous light orbs hovered around the palace. If one looked closely, they would see that there were countless characters churning within these light orbs. However, these characters were blurry, and it was hard to see them clearly. Those are all cultivation techniques. I think I saw the Great Net Mind Refreshing Technique. Purple Smoke Palm Technique. Bamboo Heart Sword. The 7 king tiers read name after name as they stared at the light orbs in the sky. The characters in some light orbs were easier to decipher than others. What? He Tao cried out in surprise. Virtuous Origin Heart Sutra. I saw an incomplete copy of this technique in an ancient sect once. This is a profound cultivation technique, and even that ancient sect only owned a damaged copy. I heard that if one masters this cultivation technique, their origin power will gain the power of lightning. As such, they'll be able to obliterate their enemies' defenses with ease. This was an ancient cultivation technique, and it had been passed down for heaven knew how many tens of thousands of years. However, it had become a lost technique already, and only the inheritances of some ancient sects still contained scraps of records about it. Was this Virtuous Origin Heart Sutra the complete version, or was it an incomplete version? If it were the complete version, its value would be incalculable. At this moment, they understood that this was indeed a treasure storage. Moreover, the value of its contents was far beyond their imagination. Xiao. Shenzhuer was the first to leap up and grab at one of the light orbs. Her speed was incredible, and her hand was just about to clutch around the light orb. However, that light orb suddenly tremored, and it shot away at an even quicker speed. Shenzhuer had only been a whisker away from grabbing hold of it. Shenzhuer landed back on the floor empty-handed. The remaining 6 king tiers were all astonished. Shenzhuer wasn't weaker than any of them. Thus, if she couldn't grab hold of a light orb, then it was very likely that none of them would be able to, either. Trying to obtain these inheritances would be immensely difficult. The 7 of them stopped speaking. They all locked onto a secret technique that they desired, and then leaped over to grab at it. It was as if the myriad of light orbs had come to life at this moment, and they all weaved around like agile fish. Light flashed through the air, and it was dazzling to the extreme. After leaping around for a while, the 7 king tiers gradually calmed down and stopped. When the last person stopped, the light orbs in the air also came to a rest. They were like stars hanging in the sky. They're truly difficult to obtain. The brows of the 7 king tiers knitted into frowns. Although they were the king tiers of the younger generation, they were genuinely in a difficult situation at this moment. Xiao, Xiao, Xiao. Right at this moment, however, 7 light orbs suddenly tremored and shot toward the 7 people. Ling Han and the others hurriedly caught the light orbs. Pa, pa, pa. They each caught a light orb with extreme ease. What was going on? They hadn't been able to obtain anything before, no matter how hard they tried, yet these light orbs were actively shooting toward them now. Pa, 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 pa. The light orbs shattered one after another. Countless characters and images appeared in their minds, and along with them, different cultivation techniques and martial arts techniques. Ling Han didn't know what techniques the others had received. However, he received a movement technique called the star-plucking step. Upon reaching the peak stage of this technique, he would be able to ascend the heavens with a single step, plucking the stars and grasping the moons. Of course, this description was slightly exaggerated. Even so, it still revealed the impressive nature of this movement technique. As to what level one could reach with this technique, that depended on each person's fortune and comprehension. Ling Han skimmed over the movement technique in his mind. However, it was extremely complex, and it wasn't something that he could digest in a short amount of time. He would need at least a few years to comprehend this technique. In fact, he might need a decade or even several decades. Immortal-level techniques were all like this: formations, pill recipes, and movement techniques were all the same. One would need to spend an exorbitant amount of time to comprehend, grasp, and utilize them. However, Ling Han wasn't annoyed. Instead, he was delighted. He had the reincarnation tree, so time really wasn't an issue. Moreover, the longer one needed to spend on a technique, the more valuable that technique would be. Shenzhuer and the others also wore looks of delight. It was evident that they had each received an extraordinary secret technique. They all looked up at the light orbs in the air, their expressions showing that they were hell-bent on obtaining more. The random light orbs that had shot over had contained supreme secret techniques, so the value of the light orbs in the air was definitely unfathomable. However, no more light orb shot over. It was as if those light orbs were the reward for them opening the door to this palace. The 7 king tiers lunged toward the light orbs again. Unsurprisingly, they all came up empty-handed. No other light orbs shot over, and this left all of them extremely disappointed. Countless treasures hovered before them, yet they could only look but not obtain them. This was torture. He, do you want more cultivation techniques? A voice suddenly asked. This voice was soft and serene, and it was as if it were right next to the ears, yet it also sounded distant at the same time. Who is it? The 7 king tiers shouted in astonishment. Show yourself. Don't hide in the shadows. You people want to see me that badly? The voice drifted into their ears again, and tendrils of black aura formed in the surroundings. This black aura was the same as the black aura outside the mystery realm. Moreover, it even possessed an air of death. The black aura formed a person amidst the 7 king tiers. "Who are you?" Shi immediately asked. "I'm naturally the owner of this place," the person said. Ling Han and the others glanced at each other before bowing, and saying, "Our respects, senior." They were all proud individuals, so they naturally wouldn't kneel. However, they had accepted secret techniques from this person, so it was only right that they bowed in respect. "Raise your heads," the person said as he raised his hand. However, his body was relatively unstable, and it continued to drift and distort. "All of you are supremely talented individuals who are worthy of receiving my inheritance." The 7 king tiers bowed again, and said, "Thank you, senior. However, I only need one successor." "Which of you is willing to acknowledge me as master?" the person asked. Ling Han and the others glanced at each other again. "Whom does senior want to take as a disciple?" they asked. Although this person had claimed that they were the owner of this place, should they really believe his words? As people who had become king tiers, they were naturally capable of making their own judgments. How could they blindly trust others? "If I were to choose," the aura-formed person purposefully paused and swept his gaze over all 7 of them. It was as if he were observing their reactions. However, how could Ling Han and the others be affected by this? Their expressions remained calm and composed. "I would choose him." The person raised his hand and pointed at Ling Han. "Me?" Ling Han shook his head, and said, "Apologies, but I have no intentions of acknowledging a master." Even if he wanted to acknowledge a master, he had a saint in his black tower. There was no need for him to acknowledge this aura-formed person as master. The person couldn't help but feel astonished. Ling Han had actually refused his offer. To the large majority of people, acknowledging elites as masters should have been an irresistible temptation. However, Ling Han hadn't hesitated at all before shaking his head and turning down his offer. The aura-formed person turned his gaze elsewhere. He pointed at Shenjuer, and said, "What about you? Are you willing to acknowledge me as master?" Shenjuer hesitated briefly before saying, "This junior already has a master, so I also have no intention of acknowledging a new master." His offer was turned down again. The aura-formed person grimaced slightly. It was as if he had taken a blow, and he asked, "What about you people?" He pointed at the 5 remaining king tiers. The 5 king tiers exchanged a glance, and then all shook their heads in reply. This person had suddenly appeared, and was now tempting them to become his disciple. The 7 king tiers couldn't help but feel suspicious. Chapter 1194, Possession. The aura-formed person was a little irritated. He was more so unable to accept this. There were 7 people, yet not a single one of them was willing to acknowledge him as master. Did they all think that they were Genesis tier saints? "Since none of you are willing to acknowledge me as master, the secret techniques of this palace will have nothing else to do with you 7, he said emotionlessly. He paused for a moment, and then gazed at the 7 king tiers. A smug look appeared on his face when he saw the corners of their eyes twitch. He didn't believe that these youths could maintain their composure and resist the temptation of the secret techniques. "However, these secret techniques are useless to me, so it's not as if I can't bestow them to you 7, the aura-formed person continued. He paused and looked at them again. He always stopped at the critical points. Ling Han was the first to react, saying, "It looks like senior has some conditions." The aura-formed person smiled, and said, "They're not conditions per se. I passed away long ago, and what's left of me right now is only a wisp of my willpower. As such, I can't collect those secret techniques even if I want to. So, I need one of you to act as a host for my willpower. That way, I'll be able to retrieve those secret techniques." If anyone wants those secret techniques, let me borrow their body for a moment. Otherwise, there's absolutely nothing I can do. Solemn expressions appeared on Ling Han and the others' faces when they heard this. Was he trying to possess them? He had made it sound enticing, saying that he was only borrowing someone's body to retrieve those light orbs. However, what if he didn't leave their body? Moreover, he claimed that he had already passed away, and said that only a wisp of his willpower was remaining. However, who could guarantee that this was true? What if this was a damaged soul? If that were the case, letting him enter their body would be suicide. Who wants these secret techniques? The auriformed person asked. His voice was dripping with temptation. Ling Han and the others remained silent, and they all entered a defensive stance. Although this auriformed person wore a facade of politeness, who knew whether he would flip out in rage after being rejected? No one, the auriformed person asked. He sighed upon seeing that no one was going to answer him. I had initially wanted to use a simpler method. By the looks of it, I can only use the more difficult method now. He swept his gaze over them, then pointed at Ling Han, and said, Your body is the most suitable for me. I've never seen such a powerful physique before. In fact, no one in history has been able to reach such a level in the mountain river tier. However, your divine sense is also incredibly tough. I'm not confident that I can erase it. Thank you for your praise, Senior. However, it seems like you're a little short-sighted. The world is enormous, so who knows whether there are other supreme prodigies? Ling Han said calmly. This auriformed person had tried to use words before resorting to force. He had used secret techniques to entice them, and was only turning to force after realizing that no one would bite his bait. That being the case, Ling Han didn't need to be polite, either. Anyhow, the auriformed person had tried to persuade them with words first, so what did that signify? This hinted at the fact that he no longer possessed his eternal river tier strength. Otherwise, why would he need to tempt mountain river tier cultivators? The auriformed person didn't become angry. He simply shook his head, and said, I traveled the world for countless years, so what prodigies haven't I seen? He turned his attention to Shenjuer, and said, I can sense a powerful bloodline in this young lady's body. Shame, what a shame. Her divine sense is protected by a secret technique, and I'm not powerful enough to challenge it at this moment. He went through the 7 king tiers, listing out all of their strengths. Ling Han and the others were all astounded. His vision was incredible, and he had been spot on with everything that he had said. In the end, the auriformed person pointed at Wuxia, and said, You're the weakest of the 7. Relatively speaking, you're also the least talented. You're not the best host for my soul, but you're definitely the easiest to possess. So, I won't be too fussy. As he spoke, he formed into a streak of light that shot toward Wuxia's body. Wuxia was naturally prepared, and he hurriedly crossed his arms, raising his power to the extreme. Close to 90 divine patterns appeared around his body. Since he didn't know what this auriformed person was, he took a more conservative approach just in case. Right now, the most important thing was to protect himself. Divine patterns flashed through the air. These were the regulations of heaven and earth, and they represented the might of the pinnacle level. However, they were utterly useless against the uncanny auriformed person. The streak of light pierced through Wuxia's defenses and shot into his mouth. Ah! Wuxia instantly wailed in agony. His arms and legs spread wide open, and his head was forcefully thrown back. The black aura surged into his mouth, forming a misty cloud around his head. It appeared extremely uncanny. Humph! Ling Han and the others naturally wouldn't stand aside and watch. They all retrieved their god tools and slashed at the black aura. Kakaka! You want to wound me with such measly power? You're several epochs too young. The unbridled laugh of the black aura cut straight into their minds. This was voice transmission through the divine sense. Regardless of how the 6 king tears attacked the black aura, it simply shifted in shape and size. They were completely unable to wound this mysterious being. Meanwhile, the black aura continued to surge into Wuxia's body, causing his stomach to expand at a rate that was visible to the naked eye. Before long, Wuxia's stomach had already expanded to the size of a wok. It was as if he had become morbidly obese. There was an agonized look on his face, and the veins on his face were all popping out. His eyes also looked like they were about to pop out of his head. The shape of his face also continued to shift. He was himself at times, though his face would become that of another person at other times. It was extremely eerie. Xiao. The last wisp of black aura crept into Wuxia's mouth at this moment, and his stomach suddenly shrunk back to its original size. It was as if they had been seeing things just then. There was a dazed look on Wuxia's face as he stared at Ling Han and the others, and he was just about to raise his arm and say something. However, he suddenly grabbed his head and began to wail in agony. A devastating aura exploded from his body. It was eerie, sinister, and filled with an air of death. It felt just like the yellow spring in the sky outside. Damn it! He's about to be possessed. Once that person succeeds, his strength might increase by an explosive amount. Ling Han and the others all cried out in alarm. Possessions were actually very rare. Ordinarily speaking, what elite would abandon their own body to take over another person's body? Possession meant that one would have to forsake their own cultivation. Moreover, when the regulations of heaven and earth determined one's lifespan, they would do so based on the divine sense of the person. Thus, an old and near-death cultivator wouldn't gain the lifespan of a younger cultivator even if they possessed their body. However, if this mysterious being successfully possessed Wuxia's body, there was a great possibility that he would gain the strength of an eternal river tier elite. As such, his battle prowess would see a terrifying increase. Kill him. Wu Wentong said resolutely. With Wuxia's strength, there was no way that he could resist the possession of the mysterious being. That being the case, it would also be impossible for them to drag the divine sense out of his body. Thus, their only option was to kill Wuxia before the possession of his body was complete. Kill him. Shen Zhuer said with a nod. Disciples of the majestic heaven sect weren't allowed to kill each other. However, that depended on the situation. Right now, Wuxia already wasn't Wuxia. Instead, he was in the process of becoming a terrifying demon. They had to kill him in the cradle. The 6 king tears charged toward Wuxia in unison. Chapter 1195, 6 king tears join hands. Although Wuxia was also a king tier of the younger generation, there was no doubt that he was the weakest of the 7 king tiers. This was one of the reasons for the mysterious being choosing him. The weaker his target, the easier they would be to possess. Moreover, the success rate would also be higher. Possessing others was in defiance of heaven and earth. Thus, he still had to be especially careful even though he was an extremely powerful being. As a result, he could only choose a weakling like Wuxia. This would maximize his chance of success. Now that Wuxia was being attacked by 6 king tears, it was very likely that he would be insta-killed. Wang. Their attacks arrived before Wuxia, yet he simply raised his hand and lightly pushed outward. An invisible barrier appeared, blocking all of their attacks. He smiled, and said, "Please have some patience. I'll get around to killing you all when I familiarize myself with this body." His smile was wicked and sinister. Ling Han and the others were stunned. How was this possible? Weren't there restrictions that targeted power at and above the Sun-Moon tier here? This mysterious being had blocked their attacks so easily, so his power was definitely above the Mountain River tier. Why wasn't he attacked by the restriction? This isn't power, but regulations, Wuxia said with a chuckle. However, black aura shrouded his face at this moment, and he naturally wasn't the same person as before. Rather, he was the mysterious being who had possessed Wuxia. He kindly explained himself, saying, "Back when I was alive, I was almost at the pinnacle of the eternal river tier. I was only a step away from reaching the Genesis tier. So, how can you measly ants fathom my grasp of regulations?" He casually twisted his body. Pa, pa, pa. His bones crackled, and his body instantly underwent a dramatic transformation. It was as if he were reshaping the appearance of this body to suit himself. Shatter. Ling Han and the other king tiers all unleashed their supreme might. Although this mysterious being had been frighteningly powerful in the past, only a wisp of his soul was still remaining at this moment. Moreover, he was relying on the body of a mountain river tier cultivator to unleash his might. It would be extremely abnormal if he could still wield the battle prowess of an eternal river tier elite. Ling Han and the 5 others were king tiers of the younger generation. Even if there were other king tiers in the vast immortal realm, it was very likely that they would only be as powerful as them. They were all at the peak stage of the pinnacle level, so it would be extraordinarily difficult to surpass them, even by just a tiny margin. It was just that Shenjuer and the others didn't dare to unleash their full 10-star power at this moment. Otherwise, they would be attacked by the restriction of this mystery realm. In that case, they wouldn't be raising their battle prowess, they would be seeking death. The 6 king tiers unleashed their most powerful attacks at Wuxia. Wuxia appeared especially at ease, and he simply battled against them using a single hand. In fact, the regulations that he used were also extremely basic, they were simply composed of a few divine patterns. However, the might that they released was tremendous, and they were easily able to block the 6 king tiers' attacks. Meanwhile, he continued to restructure his body. Numerous bone spikes protruded from his back, and there was even a solitary horn growing from his forehead. The horn glowed with a faint silver luster. If Wuxia still had his own consciousness, perhaps he might even be pleased with these changes. Although he had been a member of the 7 king tiers before, he had undoubtedly been the weakest link in the chain. Now, however, he could withstand the combined attacks of the other 6 king tiers all by himself. Moreover, he could do so with absolute ease. This was an incredible feat. If word of this got out, he would definitely become the #1 prodigy in the world. He wouldn't be one of the most powerful prodigies, but the most powerful prodigy. Unfortunately, he was no longer Wuxia. Wuxia twisted his neck, and said, "Amazing. This feels amazing." He was at least twice as tall as before, and his physique was also much thicker and bulkier. His skin also appeared very black and patchy. Looking carefully, one would realize that these were actually patches of divine patterns. It was as if he had been born with these divine patterns on his skin. It was impossible to see any signs of artificial altering. He stretched his body lazily, then smiled and stared at the 6 king tiers. "Little sh*ts, how should I kill you? Should I steam you to death, or should I braise you to death? Fuck ya mom." Ling Han retreated by some distance, and fired his annihilating dragon star arrow at Wuxia. Pa! Wuxia raised his right hand and caught the origin power arrow between 2 fingers. This was absolutely terrifying. How fast was the annihilating dragon star arrow? Yet, he had actually caught it between 2 fingers. He grinned, and said, "This arrow is fairly interesting. Had my grasp of the regulations of heaven and earth not been far above you, I really might have been hit. It's effective." Shenjuer shouted in excitement. "His hand has been wounded." Sure enough, blood was flowing from the webs of Wuxia's fingers. "Damn it!" Wuxia's expression darkened, and he said, "This body is still too weak. Although his grasp of regulations is far above us, his body isn't stronger because of this," Shi Ongua immediately said. "His power is also unchanged. We still have a chance to defeat him," He Tao said. The 6 of them nodded in agreement. They were all king tiers, so which of them didn't possess will of steel? Although they were in a dire situation, none of them was panicked or flustered. Rather, they analyzed the situation with calm and composure. Wuxia sneered, and said, "So what? Under the suppression of my regulations, what trouble can you people pose?" He extended his hand toward them. Boom! The divine patterns on his body lit up and transformed into lengths of divine chains that whipped toward the 6 king tiers. Ling Han and the others hurriedly jumped aside. Wuxia's power wasn't much weaker than theirs, and coupled with his far more powerful regulations, his battle prowess was already at a level that they couldn't match. Ha ha ha! Wuxia laughed loudly. It appeared as if a sliver of his original awareness still remained. Otherwise, what was there for him to be so smug about? Ling Han and the others were merely mountain river tier ants that he could suppress with a flip of his hands. Ling Han continued to fire his annihilating dragon star arrow, and he tried his best to maintain the distance between him and Wuxia. The annihilating dragon star arrow was something that could threaten Wuxia. Wuxia didn't dare to be careless around these attacks. His battle prowess was indeed powerful, but his cultivation was still only at the mountain river tier. This was a significant weak point. It meant that he had to deal with attacks from Ling Han and the others. Otherwise, his body would be gravely wounded if he were hit by one of the arrows. This gave the young king tiers time to move around and unleash their most powerful attacks. Green bamboo ambush! Shen Zhuer shouted. Her glabella split open, and a small bamboo surprisingly shot out from it. It expanded rapidly, eventually becoming an astonishingly large bamboo. However, its shape wasn't rigid, and this allowed it to remain unaffected in this relatively limited space. Shwa! The bamboo shook slightly, causing countless leaves to fall down. These leaves then transformed into bamboo swords that swept toward Wuxia. Purple flames! Shi-Angua roared. Flames burst from his body, and a fiery lion that was engulfed in purple divine flames appeared as he clapped his hands together. The lion lunged toward Wuxia. Surging black water! He Tao howled. One of his eyes shut tightly, while his other eye remained wide open. A black river surged from his body. The 6 king tiers all unleashed their trump cards. No one dared to hold back at this moment. Otherwise, it was truly possible that they would lose their lives here. Boom! Divine light illuminated the surroundings and swept toward Wuxia. Chapter 1196, Defeat. Theoretically speaking, Wuxia definitely wouldn't be able to withstand the combined attacks of the 6 king tiers, unless he possessed a physique as freakish as Ling Han's. However, Wuxia retracted his divine chains just before the 6 attacks hit him. The divine chains wrapped around each other and transformed into an orb that possessed an incredible defensive ability. Pung, pung, pung. The attacks landed, yet they were unable to penetrate the ball of divine chains. Their attacks couldn't even penetrate the ball of divine chains, so how could they wound Wuxia? He, abandon your meaningless resistance. You people are nothing but ants before my absolute power. Wuxia laughed, and continued, you should feel honored to die by my hands. Remember that I used to be an eternal river tier elite. At that time, I was too lazy to even kill heavenly body tier insects. However, you people are going to experience the honor of being killed by me. How glorious is this? Ha ha ha. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, I'll even possess the ability to kill saints in the future. So, why don't you obediently stick your head over and let me hack it off? I'll allow you to experience an even greater glory. Humph. Wuxia's expression became cold, and he shouted, you. It appears as if the previous owner of this body detests you immensely. A killing intent has naturally arisen. Oh, I simply gave him a beating, Ling Han said calmly. If you want to, I can also give you a beating. What an arrogant brat. Wuxia's expression darkened. Although he had been a supreme elite in the past and it was thus beneath him to argue with a mountain river tier cultivator, was still displeased when being talked back to like that. He truly wanted to slap Ling Han to death. However, Shen Zhuer and the others had already launched their second volley of attacks. This forced him to go back on the defensive. After all, he was no longer an eternal river tier elite. Ling Han seized this opportunity to unleash his ultimate arrow. He hadn't participated in the second volley of attacks. Instead, he had waited until Wuxia blocked this volley of attacks and unraveled the divine chains that shielded him. He was going to take advantage of this instant to kill him. There was only a single chance. Although his power could recover quickly, that mysterious being wouldn't fall for the same trick twice. He was too powerful and too smart for that. All of you, die. After blocking the second volley of attacks, the mysterious being unraveled the orb of divine chains, just as Ling Han had expected. Countless divine chains shot toward Ling Han and the others, seeking to penetrate their bodies. One's defenses would be at their weakest right after they launched their most powerful attack. This was the same for everyone. Pu. Shen Zhuer and the 4 other king tiers were all struck by the divine chains. Some were hit in the hands, while others were hit in the legs. Some were hit in the torso. Regardless of where the divine chains hit, they were able to pierce straight through the king tiers. Blood sprayed through the air. It was at this moment that Ling Han unleashed his ultimate arrow. Pu. However, he was also struck by the divine chains the instant that he unleashed the arrow. He hadn't dodged or evaded, so it was only natural that he was struck. Fortunately, his physique was powerful enough. The divine chains had only been able to pierce into his body, and were unable to crush his godly bones. They hadn't been able to penetrate all the way through his body, either. Xiao. The brilliant arrow one that carried the hopes of Ling Han shot toward Wuxia. It was as quick as light, and it was truly an arrow of ultimate speed. Aya! Wuxia roared in pain. The ultimate arrow had hit his left shoulder, and the explosiveness of the arrow had obliterated it completely. His left arm fell to the floor, and a fountain of blood gushed from his shoulder. This was already the result of him instinctively blocking with his divine chains and slightly altering the path of the arrow. If he hadn't done so, it would have been his heart that exploded, not his left shoulder. Brat, I'm going to kill you. Wuxia roared in fury. He was both shocked and enraged. He had almost died at the hands of a measly mountain river tier cultivator. He was so infuriated that he could barely think straight. Xiao. The divine chains whipped back toward Wuxia, at the same time bringing Ling Han closer to him. Wuxia raised a hand and unleashed another 7 divine chains. These divine chains shot toward Ling Han's hands, feet, chest, and abdomen. How could Ling Han block these divine chains? The ultimate arrow was indeed mighty, yet it would exhaust his power after a single use. Even though his speed of recovery was quicker now, he would still need an entire 30 minutes to fully recover his power. However, he only had a few seconds right now, and this was barely enough time to recover even a shred of his stamina. Ling Han was unable to defend against this attack, and he was ruthlessly struck by the 7 divine chains. Pu. Blood sprayed from his body. However, Wuxia was still rendered speechless. Ling Han had been utterly defenseless, yet his divine chains still hadn't been able to pierce through his body completely. As such, they hadn't caused any significant damage. Fuck. How can there be such a freak? Wuxia was slightly astonished. If he were at his strongest, he would be able to crush Ling Han with a simple wave of his hand. However, he could only rely on the power of regulations at this moment. The problem was, his cultivation level was too low. As such, the amount and quality of regulations that he could wield were also limited. If he tried to summon regulations above his cultivation level, his body would be obliterated by the regulations first. Thus, his divine chains could only cause minor damage to Ling Han, even though they could cause severe damage to Shenjue and the others. Humph. I'll slowly tear you to pieces then. Wuxia said coldly. He shook his divine chains, and sent Shenjue and the 4 other king tiers flying. Pung, pung, pung. They all crashed into the walls of the palace. Meanwhile, Wuxia brandished all of his divine chains, planning to launch a thick and furious attack on Ling Han. If he couldn't kill him with a single attack, he would grind him to death slowly and steadily, like ants slowly biting an elephant to death. Ling Han's physique was indeed as tough as level 5 godly metal. However, Wuxia's divine chains were like a saw that could slowly cut through level 5 godly metal. He simply needed a bit of time. Pu. Ling Han was struck by the divine chains again. He had barely recovered any of his power at this moment, so he was naturally being belted like a sandbag. Shenjue and the others were all gravely wounded, so they wouldn't be able to help him anytime soon. The divine chains continued to strike Ling Han, and he quickly transformed into a bloodied figure. Ha ha ha. Wuxia laughed loudly. This unbridled laugh contained both the emotions of the mysterious being as well as the pleasure of Wuxia himself. Ling Han had humiliated him in public before, so how could he not hate him? Ling Han was being mercilessly beaten, yet he still continued to recover his power. He was waiting for a chance to counterattack. If there were truly no chance of winning, he wouldn't insist on continuing this battle either. He would hide into the Black Tower, and perhaps even chuck Notionless Saint out. Doing so would probably give this mysterious being a huge fright. Shenjue and the others naturally didn't know that Ling Han still had the Black Tower. Upon seeing him being mercilessly beaten, they were certain that there was already no chance for him to turn the tables. Meanwhile, they were all severely wounded, and only barely hanging on to life. By the looks of it, defeat was inevitable. Apart from waiting for death, what else could they still do? Although they still had trump cards, this mystery realm forbade power at or above the Sun-Moon tier. Anyhow, faced with the formidable regulations wielded by this mysterious being, it seemed as if everything that they did was in vain. If they unleashed their trump cards, they would merely be seeking an earlier death. They would be killed by the restrictions, which was simply an alternate method of death, with an alternate killer. Was there really no other way? They were all individuals with steely willpower, and they definitely wouldn't give up even in the face of despair. Their minds whirred as they analyzed all the possible methods. Hee, sinking shade old demon, you've finally come out after all. A thunder-like voice suddenly boomed through the surroundings, causing the entire palace to tremor. What? There's another person here? Ling Han and the others were all filled with renewed hope. In the current situation, a new variable was extremely desirable. Chapter 1197, 10-million-year-old plot. What? Wuxia's expression changed drastically, and he exclaimed, Lan Yun, you're still not dead. He looked at the corpse on the floor. Hee. There was a chuckle, and the blue-skinned corpse on the floor surprisingly crawled up. A long shadow was cast by its 9-meter-tall figure. Ling Han and the others were all astounded. Although they had been suspicious whether the mysterious being was the true owner of this place, they were still stunned to see the blue-skinned elite get to his feet. Wuxia stared at the blue-skinned elite, and he started to laugh loudly after a short while, saying, So, you truly are dead. Your body is merely being controlled by a wisp of your remnant awareness. Indeed, the blue-skinned elite said with a nod. However, it's more than enough to kill you. Wuxia's expression changed, and he said with a hint of panic, You didn't purposefully set this up, did you? Were you waiting for an opportunity to kill me? For my divine sense to leave the land's heart and possess another body? The blue-skinned elite laughed loudly, and said, Or else. You had fled to the land's heart, and I hadn't been able to pursue you in my dying state. If I didn't draw you out, how would I be able to deal with you? Such forbearance. Wuxia said. It's already been tens of millions of years, and your corpse has almost turned to dust. Why are you still holding on to such old grudges? Why do you insist on killing me? Humph. Even if I die 1,000 times over, I still won't forgive wretches from the netherworld, the blue-skinned elite roared. What? This mysterious being is actually from the netherworld? At this moment, it finally made sense why the words carved by the blue-skinned elite were filled with fury and killing intent toward the netherworld. From the signs of battle outside, it could be deduced that an intense battle had broken out between the two elites. The blue-skinned elite had probably won, but suffered fatal wounds. Meanwhile, the body of the mysterious being had been obliterated such that only his divine sense remained. However, due to the unique nature of beings from the netherworld, he had been able to hold on to life in the land's heart. Tens of millions of years had passed, and the mysterious being thought that the blue-skinned elite had died. Thus, he came out to possess someone's body so that he could live a second life. Anyhow, the restriction in this mystery realm was most likely used to suppress the mysterious being and limit his activity to the palace. Otherwise, this mysterious being should have escaped long ago with the great number of times that this mystery realm had already been opened. The mysterious being had simply thought that the restriction was in place to suppress him for all eternity. However, he hadn't realized that this was a double-layered scheme. The restriction was merely in place to give him a feeling of security, to make him believe that he could possess someone and escape. Now, however, his physical body was unbelievably fragile. Wuxia trembled in apprehension. He hadn't been this nervous and terrified even when his original body had been obliterated. He had only just possessed this body, so it was impossible for his divine sense to leave. Lan Yun, how scheming of you, he spat through gritted teeth. Against a coward like you, how could I not scheme? The blue-skinned elite smiled, and continued, don't even think about wasting time. Although this is only a wisp of my awareness, I can still stay around for 3 to 5 days. Wuxia's expression changed again. He had indeed wanted to waste time. Unlike him, the blue-skinned elite had genuinely died. There was only a wisp of his awareness remaining, and it was like a flame without fuel. It would disappear in no time. However, 3 to 5 days was still too long. This blue-skinned elite absolutely despised beings from the netherworld, so how could he last for 3 to 5 days? Even if he spoke until his mouth was cracked and dry, it still wouldn't be long enough to grind through 5 days. The blue-skinned elite attacked, and said, sinking shade old demon, accept your death. Boom! A terrifying power swept through the palace, and even the mystery realm shuddered. This was a power that transcended the heavenly body tier. Why didn't the restriction attack him? What a joke, of course it didn't. He was the owner of this place, so why would the restriction attack him? Boom! His palm struck down, and Wuxia instantly transformed into a cloud of blood. His body was far too fragile, and there was simply no way it could withstand power at the eternal river tier. However, the blue-skinned elite didn't let his guard down. Instead, he continued to scan the surroundings with his divine sense. Elites from the netherworld weren't easy to kill. He had obliterated this mysterious being's body in the past, yet his divine sense had still managed to escape. Humph! Still trying to escape? The blue-skinned elite struck at the door. Pung! The large door shattered, and they saw a shadow frantically streak out. This shadow was extremely hard to catch with the naked eye. It was the elite from the netherworld. Ling Han and the other king tiers all sucked in a sharp breath. An eternal river tier elite with a huge advantage in cultivation level had attacked him, yet he had still been able to survive and flee. The being from the netherworld was unfathomably powerful. Lan Yun, you actually forced me to use this technique. Even if you die, I'll still grind your bones to dust. The shadow flew toward the yellow spring in the sky. This yellow spring was formed from the corpse of the Netherworld elite, so his power would increase by an immense amount if he fused his divine sense into it. However, his previous body had already died, so the yellow spring would still be extremely dangerous to him. It was like a potent poison. Even so, he had no option but to take a massive gamble. Otherwise, he would definitely die. As long as he survived, there was hope that he could heal his wounds, no matter how severe they were. The blue-skinned elite humphed, and said, "I've plotted for tens of millions of years now, so how can I fall at the final hurdle?" His body flashed, and he dashed out at an incredible speed. His fist smashed into the yellow spring in the sky. Star-plucking step. Ling Han exclaimed in his mind. Although he still hadn't started to cultivate this movement technique yet, he could still recognize it at a single glance. Hua! The yellow spring was severed in the middle. The blue-skinned elite shuddered, and then transformed into a giant that measured 3,000 meters in height. He blocked the flow of the yellow spring as he stood proudly in the sky. You! The Netherworld elite wanted to vomit blood. He could no longer draw on the power of the yellow spring. His voice shrill, he shouted, "You're blocking the power of the dark yellow spring with your body, so you'll turn to bones in no time. If you want to die. Fuck." He had subconsciously treated the blue-skinned elite as a living person. However, he quickly came to his senses. Although this blue-skinned elite was jumping around and attacking him, his vitality had already disappeared long ago. He was merely a remnant wisp of awareness that definitely couldn't last for long. That being the case, what did it matter whether his body disintegrated or not? After all, he had already been dead for tens of millions of years. Ha ha ha. I've been waiting for this day. The blue-skinned elite thrust his palm toward the shadow. Countless divine patterns intertwined, and the glow of regulations radiated brilliantly. This was the true power of Eternal River tier elites. No, the Netherworld elite wailed in despair. His wail instantly traveled throughout the entire mystery realm. This was the despairing cry of an Eternal River tier elite. A thick sense of loathing and agitation hung in the air. There was also a harrowing eeriness. This was a martial intent that was unique to Netherworld cultivators. It's finally over. A relieved smile spread across the blue-skinned elite's face. Boom! His gigantic body crashed down, rapidly shrinking in size as it did so. It was then washed away by the yellow spring, becoming one of the tens of millions of wraiths. A supreme elite had finally disappeared from this world once and for all. Ling Han and the 5 other king tiers were all speechless. They had been close to useless in this battle. They had simply been used as bait. They were the prodigious king tiers of the younger generation, yet they had actually fallen to the level of mere bait. Chapter 1198, The Rain Emperor had disappeared. They were prodigious king tiers, yet they could only act as mere bait. This left Ling Han and the others feeling extremely uncomfortable. However, this was the undeniable truth. As prodigious as they were still mere trash before power at the Eternal River tier. The death of Wuxia was a bloody reminder of this fact. He had become a host to the divine sense of a Netherworld elite, and in the end, he had been mercilessly killed. Before the blue-skinned elite, even the most talented prodigies of this galaxy were like fragile debris. They didn't even have the right to make him hesitate. This was a fate that could befall any one of them. However, why had such a fate befallen Wuxia? That was simply because he had been the weakest member of the 7 king tiers. He was the easiest to possess, and thus he had been chosen. The king tiers were unable to accept this. They could die in battle, but dying like this. It was far too vexatious, and it was far too meaningless. However, whom could they complain to? The blue-skinned elite had died, and the Netherworld elite had also been killed. Wuxia, the unfortunate victim of all this, had also died. The 6 king tiers remained silent for a long time. Only the yellow spring continued to crash through the sky. This river was formed from the corpse of an eternal river tier elite, and it continued to flow even tens of millions of years after his death. It was as if it would flow for all eternity. At this moment, they all understood why this yellow spring felt so eerie and so harrowing. This was because it contained power from the netherworld. "Let's explore the palace and see if we can obtain some more secret techniques," Shurangwa said. He was the first to break the silence. Everyone nodded in agreement. What was done, and the dead couldn't be brought back to life either. Moping over this matter wouldn't be of any help. They returned to the palace, where the light orbs still silently hovered in the air. However, these light orbs would still dash away when they tried to grab them, giving them no chance of obtaining the secret techniques inside. By the looks of it, their strength was insufficient to obtain these light orbs. As king tiers of the younger generation, Ling Han and the others naturally knew when to let things go. They resolutely turned around to leave. There were still many valuable items on the way out, such as godly medicines and perhaps some ancient techniques left in the ancient sites. Staying in the palace would be a complete waste of time. If they made their way to the entrance now, they would at least still obtain some treasures. It was just a matter of how much they obtained. After exiting the palace, they all turned around to take one final look. That was where Wuxia had died, though not a single scrap of his being was left. They all shook their head before leaving. After a long time, Ling Han released Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun from the Black Tower. When the old Ginseng appeared, his expression was dark, and he said, "Sh*TTY brat, what kind of spatial tool is that? Why is it so freakish?" He had almost been planted, and he had almost had his awareness erased by the tool spirit inside. In other words, he had almost become a godly medicine for consumption again. Not only that, but there was even an old divine tree inside, one that was far higher in grade than himself. He had no choice but to obediently call him Grandpa. Moreover, the divine sense of a saint was wrapped around a branch of the divine tree, and this person still terrified him, even though his might was already non-existent. Ling Han chuckled, and asked, "Was it fun?" "Fun your mom. See how I stomp you to death. You actually dared to scare your grandpa." The old Ginseng became angrier by the second, and he angrily launched a kick at Ling Han. Ling Han casually blocked his strikes. The old Ginseng was simply venting his anger, and he wasn't genuinely having a falling out with Ling Han. Thus, he quickly stopped his attacks. "What a hot temper," Ling Han said with a smile. The old Ginseng's eyes darted about, and he turned to Shui Yenyu, saying, "Beauty, want to change a partner? I'm definitely more useful than that brat. See, my entire body is exuding a treasured aura. Breathing in a lungful will increase your lifespan by 3 years and make you younger by 10 years. Ow!" Ling Han had hammered him on the head, and he instantly grabbed his head in pain. They returned the way they came, and they arrived before the medicinal mountain after just a few days. Ling Han started to undo the restrictions again, and they tried to harvest as much godly medicine as they could. However, undoing the restrictions took an extremely long time, and thus they were forced to set off again after obtaining just 2 godly medicines. They walked against the flow of the yellow spring, and they quickly arrived at the place where they had entered. This place was already brimming with people as there were only 3 days left before the half-year time limit expired. People naturally came here a few days earlier because missing the exit date and being trapped inside this mystery realm meant death. "Master!" Ding Ping was the first to run over. Mu Rongqing and the others followed after him. None of them had reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and thus none of them had gone to the Eagle Beak Mountain and so on. Instead, they had deviated from this standard route and went elsewhere in search of their own opportunities. This allowed them to obtain quite a bountiful harvest. "Huh! Second brother still hasn't returned, Ling Han said as he looked around. Out of those who had entered this mystery realm, only the Rain Emperor was still missing. Feng Peyun and the others all shook their heads. They had each gone their own way, and thus they didn't know what opportunities the Rain Emperor had come across, nor did they know what troubles he had encountered. With second brother's strength and willpower, he should be able to stay safe and escape even if he comes across dangerous situations, Ling Han said. He was confident in the Rain Emperor's abilities. Huh? Sister Shui, Ninth King, why are you ladies also here? Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner walked over at this moment. They were also disciples of the majestic Heaven sect, so they could naturally enter this mystery realm as well. Ling Han hadn't revealed his identity to them yet, and thus they didn't know that he was Ling Han. They merely found it strange that Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun were in the company of an unfamiliar man. This was especially the case with Shui Yenyu. Hadn't she been all lovey-dovey with Ling Han? Perhaps she had dumped him after not seeing him for 3 years? That stupid blockhead. So pitiful. Shui Yenyu nodded at the two women. Hu Feiyun was much friendlier in comparison, and she immediately started to chatter with them. She was extremely young, so she naturally craved friends that were at a similar age to her. She wanted friends with whom she could share her grief and happiness. Fortunately, Hu Feiyun guarded the secret of Han Lin's identity, but this was probably because Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner hadn't asked. If they asked, Ling Han was almost certain that Hu Feiyun would spit out the truth. Ling Han didn't trust this ditzy woman to keep a secret. A day passed, and then 2. However, the Rain Emperor still didn't return. Ling Han and the others started to become anxious. There was only a day until the entrance to the mystery realm reopened, and they would all have to leave at that time. Otherwise, they would remain in this mystery realm forever. What on earth had the Rain Emperor come across? In this anxious atmosphere, the 3rd day rolled around. However, there was still no sign of the Rain Emperor. Wang! The air distorted, and a passageway silently appeared in the sky. They could vaguely see a giant ripping space apart with his hands. This giant was none other than Venerable Trinity. It's time to leave. Let's go. The cultivators started to stream out. However, there were quite a lot of people here, so they couldn't all leave at once. Where's second brother? Why has he still not returned? Mu Rongqing was pacing about in unease. Ling Han was also extremely worried. However, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and he said, perhaps second brother is the chosen one. What chosen one? Feng Peyun and the others asked. I entered the abode that belonged to the owner of this mystery realm, and he had left a dying note. He said that, when the 7 stars align, 'tis the time my successor appears. The 7 stars referred to me, He Tao, and the others. It was us 7 who had opened the door to the palace. As for the latter half of that sentence, it's probably saying that the senior will choose a successor. I had initially thought that it would be one of the 7 king tiers. However, by the looks of it now, he probably chose someone else. It's extremely likely that he chose second brother. Chapter 1199, False Accusation. Second brother received the inheritance of an eternal river tier elite? Mu Rongqing instantly became excited, saying, that's definitely the case. With second brother's talents, he definitely has the right to receive such an inheritance. Feng Peyun also nodded slowly. He had to admit that the Rain Emperor was supremely talented. In fact, it was possible that he was as talented as Ling Han. That brat is fairly lucky, Helian Tianyun said in envy. Ling Han had speculated thusly to reassure himself and to give himself hope. Otherwise, he would lose his second brother forever. The cultivators continued to stream out, but Ling Han and the others still didn't leave. Although they suspected that the Rain Emperor had been chosen as a successor, they hadn't received any confirmation of this. As such, they weren't certain that this was the case, and thus they wanted to wait for a little longer. In the end, they were the only people still remaining in the mystery realm. "Hurry up and come out!" Venerable Trinity shouted. Why were these people idling about? Didn't they know that it was extremely burdensome to keep this passageway open, even for an eternal river tier elite like him? Ling Han nodded, and then left the mystery realm with the others. Xiao. The passageway instantly closed. "Hurry up and leave," Venerable Trinity said. "Understood." Venerable Trinity cleared the path for them as they speedily left the valley. When they made their way out, Venerable Trinity immediately left them and flew into the sky. He Tao, Shenjuer, Ling Han, a heavenly body tier called. These were the names of the 7 king tiers. Return to the sect as soon as possible and report to the 7 Rain Hall. Ling Han and the 5 other king tiers hurriedly accepted this command. However, Wuxia would remain in the mystery realm forever, and it would be impossible for him to return to the sect again. In any case, they understood that the majestic heaven sect was interested in the inheritances that they had obtained from the palace. The sect had long been aware that the door to the palace could only be opened by 7 king tiers. Thus, now that they had left the mystery realm, the sect would naturally summon them to ask about their gains. If the techniques they received were valuable enough, the sect would naturally make a copy of them. Everyone returned where they had come from, with the disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect returning to the Majestic Heaven sect. If one wasn't from the Majestic Heaven sect, they would return to wherever they cultivated or lived. This was the Death Valley, and there was nothing of worth apart from the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm there. People naturally didn't want to stick around this place for too long. Ling Han and the others didn't leave right away. They still wanted to wait for the Rain Emperor. However, 10 days passed, and there was still no sign of the Rain Emperor. Let's go. If second brother has truly obtained the inheritance, he'll naturally return when he masters his craft. Ling Han nodded after a brief moment of thought. Waiting here was pointless, and he had also received a command to return to the sect as quickly as possible. If this was a command from Venerable Trinity, even Empress Luan Xing wouldn't be able to protect him if he arrived too late and offended him. They set off for the Majestic Heaven sect. They had the cloud-piercing shuttle, so their speed was incredibly quick. Although they had stayed at Death Valley for an extra 10 days, they only arrived at the sect 1 to 2 days later than everyone else. Ling Han immediately went to the 7 Rain Hall, a hall that was located on the cloud-piercing peak. However, he didn't see He Tao and the others when he reported his arrival and was summoned into the hall by a Sun-Moon tier elite. They had either come already, or they still hadn't returned to the sect yet. "What secret technique did you obtain in that treasure storage?" the Sun-Moon tier elite asked. By the looks of it, Shenjuer and the others had already reported to the 7 Rain Hall and recounted the events of the mystery realm. This wasn't strange. However, did they truly report the secret techniques that they had received? Or did they report some random cultivation technique to conceal the truth? Ling Han was slightly hesitant. Should I hand the star-plucking step over? He had mulled over this movement technique while waiting at the Death Valley and returning to the sect. However, even though he had completed a dozen or so days of comprehension under the reincarnation tree, he still wasn't able to grasp it. In fact, he was still quite a distance away from being able to grasp it. From this fact alone, one could imagine just how high-grade this movement technique was. Should I hand it over for nothing? Rest assured, the sect won't take your secret technique for nothing. We'll definitely compensate you fairly, the Sun-Moon tier elite said. Even if I want to hand over another secret technique to hide the star-plucking step, there's nothing suitable. None of the 9 Dragons Tyrant Body Art, Annihilating Dragon Star Arrow, and Universal 8 Desolation technique was necessarily less valuable than the star-plucking step. In fact, they were perhaps even more valuable. Thus, he pondered for a moment before saying, I received a movement technique called the star-plucking step. Write the secret technique out, the Sun Moon Tier Elite urged. We'll reward you based on its quality. Ling Han nodded, and then started to write the movement technique onto paper. After writing for a while, he was surprised to discover that a portion of the inheritance couldn't be written in words. It was something that could be understood, but not described. No amount of words or writing would be able to encapsulate it. However, if this portion was left out, the might of the movement technique would decrease dramatically. He was slightly taken aback. However, he immediately decided to let it go. He wasn't interested in the reward from the sect anyway. He continued to write, and it wasn't long before he finished. Done? The Sun Moon Tier Elite asked. He took the copy and immediately sealed it with a decree, not even flipping through it. The decree seal would make it easy to detect whether someone had read the copy before it reached its target recipient. You can leave now. You'll receive your reward once the grade of this movement technique is determined. Ling Han nodded and bowed respectfully before leaving. He was a very busy person. He had to study pill recipes, and he also had to practice movement techniques. Moreover, he was nearing the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and he would have to comprehend regulations of the Sun Moon tier after reaching it. This would definitely be time-consuming. He felt like there wasn't enough time. Ling Han cultivated earnestly in reclusion, comprehending pill recipes at times, and practicing the star-plucking step at others. Time slowly crept by. However, a hidden turbulence silently swirled through the sect, becoming more and more serious by the day. Gao Huang lodged a complaint to the sect, accusing Ling Han of wantonly killing fellow disciples and seizing thousand-source true fluid that originally belonged to the Gao faction. News of this had originally been confined to the higher-ups, with not many people aware of the complaint. However, it suddenly spread throughout the entire Majestic Heaven sect, and every single disciple was now aware of the situation. The sect instantly erupted in uproar. Killing fellow disciples was a massive taboo, and it was an action that would draw scorn and disdain. However, many disciples had witnessed the battle on the Eagle Beak Mountain and seen a portion of the truth. Ling Han had suppressed the masses and obtained 4 drops of thousand-source true fluid. As for whether the members of the Gao faction had died by Ling Han's hands, no one knew. This battle had occurred after the battle for the thousand-source true fluid, so no one had been around to witness it. Moreover, the Majestic Heaven sect had Sun Moon tier disciples in addition to Mountain River tier disciples, and only a portion of people had been at Eagle Beak Mountain to witness the battle. Rumors about Ling Han killing fellow disciples for thousand-source true fluid was swirling about, and after a while, these rumors gradually became the truth. Killing fellow disciples and stealing their treasures was an abhorrent act. Ling Han's rising reputation was instantly crushed, and many people expressed their disdain for him. Was such a person worthy of remaining in their sect? A growing number of voices called for Ling Han to be punished severely. Otherwise, the anger of the masses would be unsated. Chapter 1200, Analysis. Ling Han generally stayed in the Black Tower and cultivated under the reincarnation tree, so he was naturally unaware of the huge commotion outside. It was only when he prepared to go to the Mo clan establishment to collect some pills and pay his debt that he was stopped by Shui Yanyu and informed of the situation. Them again? Ling Han said, a cold look in his eyes. This was the same as what had happened at the Chaotic Star's Majestic Empire. Zhao Luan had lodged a false accusation against him, and he had been put on a public trial by the army. Fortunately, the Empress had issued a decree that exonerated him. In fact, she had even seized the opportunity to execute a bunch of corrupt officials. However, due to the sensitivity of Zhao Luan's status, even the Empress hadn't dealt with him. This was partly because the matter hadn't been too serious. Moreover, there hadn't been a relationship between Ling Han and the Empress at that time. If such an event were to occur now, the Empress would probably deal with Zhao Luan swiftly and mercilessly. If Great General Zhao dared to oppose her, she would execute him along with his son. It wasn't as if she hadn't executed heavenly body tier generals before. However, this was the majestic heaven sect, and the Empress' influence couldn't reach this far. Even if she came over to help Ling Han, there was still a mountain-esque eternal river tier elite keeping watch over the sect. Who in this galaxy could challenge an eternal river tier elite? Ling Han humphed, and said, "They're twisting the truth and completely fabricating stories. How shameless." He had obtained the 4 drops of thousand source true fluid himself, and this was a fact that many people knew. Regarding the people from the Gao faction, it was Shi Ming who had chosen to unleash power at the Sun-Moon tier. However, his action had led to him being attacked and killed by the restriction of the Mystery Realm. Meanwhile, the other members of the group had been killed by the rain of blood and bones that had formed when Shi Ming exploded and died. He hadn't laid a single finger on them. Yet, they had put all of these deaths on his head. Gao Huang is such a shameless person. There was a cold glint in Ling Han's eyes. He had come across shameless people before, yet he had never come across someone as shameless and flagrant as Gao Huang. He had forcefully twisted the truth to fit his own narrative. Right now, the problem is that everyone in the sect is talking about how you massacred fellow disciples and stole their 1000 source true fluid, Shui Yanyu said anxiously. Ling Han shook his head, and said, "There's no need to worry about the matter regarding the 1000 source true fluid. A great deal of people witnessed me obtaining it. Anyhow, who's willing to believe that the Gao faction can obtain 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid all by themselves?" Shui Yanyu nodded in realization. She had been extremely worried, so she hadn't been able to analyze the situation as calmly and clearly as Ling Han. The more pressing issue is the death of Shi Ming and the others. Ling Han rubbed his chin, and continued, "After all, no one witnessed that battle. Even if someone did witness it, it's extremely likely that they're not a disciple of the majestic heaven sect. Thus, it's even more unlikely that they'll step forward to act as a witness for me. This was a vast galaxy with billions upon billions of people, so where would they find a witness if there was even one? Moreover, witnesses could be bought off. In terms of wealth, Ling Han was definitely no match for the entire Gao faction that had the support of a heavenly body tier elite. Although Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun had also witnessed the battle, they had extremely close relationships with Ling Han. Thus, even if they offered witness statements, they would merely be dismissed as biased toward Ling Han. Anyhow, being as shameless as Gao Huang is, he'll probably find a few people to pose as witnesses. They'll claim that they personally saw me killing those Gao faction members. Ling Han speculated what kinds of methods Gao Huang might use. "What can we do?" Shui Yanyu asked anxiously. This was the majestic heaven sect, so the Gao faction was definitely very influential. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, "Even the Gao faction can't shut out the heavens with one hand. This is the majestic heaven sect, after all, not the Gao faction. However, whether or not this matter can be resolved depends on whether the other 8 factions are willing to weigh in on it. It also depends on Venerable Trinity's attitude." Shui Yanyu composed herself, and also started to analyze the situation, saying, "Venerable Trinity has 9 disciples in total, and each has their own faction. Out of the other 8 factions, there are definitely a few that are hostile to the Gao faction. We don't need all of them, and we'll be able to resist the Gao faction if just one of them is willing to help." "Correct. However, why should they help us? What's in it for them?" Ling Han smiled, and said, "They're not my wives, so they're not always thinking about what's in my best interests." He pulled Shui Yanyu into an embrace. He had been busy with cultivation and comprehension these past few days, so he hadn't had a chance to show love to this bewitching beauty. Now that her soft and shapely body was pressed against him, he couldn't help but feel aroused. Shui Yanyu felt a little annoyed, and she naturally blamed Ling Han for being so heartless. He had ignored her for an entire fortnight. However, he had actually become aroused at this moment. She truly didn't know what to say. "Come, it's only right that we discuss important matters in bed." After some passionate love-making, Ling Han embraced Shui Yenyu in satisfaction, and said, "Everyone knows that I obtained a few drops of Thousand Source True Fluid. If I want to seek help from any of the other factions, they'll probably ask for Thousand Source True Fluid in return." Shui Yenyu nodded, and said, "Gao Huang is probably trying to force you into submission as well. He wants you to willingly hand him the Thousand Source True Fluid." Even though I've got yet to meet him, his actions reveal that he's a cold-blooded person. He doesn't give a toss about his subordinates' lives, as long as they can fulfill his goals. Ling Han humphed, and said, "Right now, he's stuck at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. If he doesn't obtain any Thousand Source True Fluid, he might need over 1,000,000 years to reach the Heavenly Body tier. In fact, there's a possibility that he'll be stuck at the Sun-Moon tier forever. So, he'll definitely do everything he can to snatch your Thousand Source True Fluid." Shui Yenyu exclaimed in astonishment. Ling Han chuckled coldly, and said, "He's truly a wild dog. I'll need to up my guard, or it really will be troublesome if I'm bitten by him. Can't he wait for next time?" Shui Yenyu asked in irritation. Ling Han shook his head, and said, "How can a despicable person like him keep his calm after seeing 4 drops of Thousand Source True Fluid placed in front of him? Moreover, even though I'm a seed, I've come to the immortal realm from a small world. In other words, I'm the easiest to pick on." The other 5 king tiers had each obtained a drop of Thousand Source True Fluid as well, meaning Gao Huang would be able to obtain another 5 drops if he were able to force all of them to give their drop up. This would be more than what Ling Han had. 9 drops of Thousand Source True Fluid was better than 4, right? It would definitely increase his chance of breaking through to the Heavenly Body tier. So, why didn't he target Shenjuer and the others? This was because their background was too powerful. Gao Huang was merely afraid of offending them. "But doesn't the Empress hold you in high regard?" Shui Yenyu asked. She struggled to come up with words to describe their relationship. The relationship between Ling Han and the Empress was very fuzzy, after all. Although the Empress helped me before, everyone thought that she had left a spiritual mark on the 9th king's body. They thought that the 9th king had asked her for help, Ling Han said. This made a world of difference. If the Heavenly Body tier elite didn't want to help Ling Han, Gao Huang would only have to face the 9th king. If that were the case, what would he need to be afraid of? Even if they did want to help, they would both have Heavenly Body tier elites supporting them. Moreover, it was clear that Gao Fenghu had an Eternal River tier master was more impressive. "So you're saying that we have to deal with this ourselves?" Shui Yenyu asked uneasily. Ling Han nodded, and then said, "Don't worry. If they truly piss me off, I'll chuck Notionless Saint out. Although he's lost his saintly might, he was once a saint, after all. Using him to frighten people should be fine." Shui Yenyu nodded and finally felt a little more at ease. However, Ling Han knew that he wouldn't be able to use Notionless Saint. He had already refined his own saintly might for his future disciple, so how could he deter Eternal River tier elites? In fact, could he even deter Heavenly Body tier elites? He had only said this to reassure Shui Yenyu. Chapter 1201, Conflict. Ling Han decided to roll with the punches. Although the sect was flooded with rumors that demonized him, those who were objective and intelligent would be able to see through them easily. Ling Han believed that those who were talented enough to enter the Majestic Heaven sect were all relatively smart people. Thus, such rumors would eventually run out of steam. He still went to the Mo clan establishment as planned, and he sold them a large number of alchemical pills. He also made a copy of a pill recipe. It was an ancient recipe, and it was very likely that it was already lost in the outside world. Thus, he could probably sell it for a good price. Regarding the 1000-source true fluid, he decided to sell it as well. Don't you really want these, Gao Huang? Well, I'm not going to give them to you, and I'm even going to make you lose face. Ling Han genuinely didn't need these 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid. They could aid one's comprehension, but they couldn't increase one's cultivation level. Cultivating under the reincarnation tree couldn't improve one's comprehension, but this could be made up for with time. Perhaps 1 or 2 days of comprehension wouldn't be enough, but what about 8 or 10 years of comprehension? In a sense, the reincarnation tree had similar effects to 1000-source true fluid. Moreover, its beneficial effects could be used endlessly. Thus, Ling Han naturally wanted to sell his 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid. That way, he could increase his wealth and purchase more godly metal to raise the grade of his divine demon sword. Anyhow, Ling Han was destined to be a poor sod before he evolved the material of his divine demon sword to divine metal. All of his money would be spent on the divine demon sword. However, the might of his divine demon sword was already starting to show itself. It possessed a battle prowess that was no weaker than his. No matter how much he spent, this sword was worth the cost. Han Huo was stunned upon hearing Ling Han's offer. He then happily agreed and started to discuss the fine details with him. He decided to hold an auction, and the items for auction were naturally the 1000-source true fluid, ancient pill recipe, and alchemical pills that Ling Han provided. 1000-source true fluid and ancient pill recipes were all very valuable items, and thus it made sense to maximize their selling price by holding an auction. As for alchemical pills, they would definitely sell for more thanks to the influence of the other more valuable items. Those who did business were indeed more skilled at these kinds of things. Han Hua had taken far more things into consideration than Ling Han. Ling Han nodded in approval, and let Han Hua deal with the remaining matters. Meanwhile, he returned to the majestic heaven sect. He still had to practice the star-plucking step and study the new pill recipes. He arrived at his palace, only to see the old Ginseng talking and joking with Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner. He was massaging their shoulders, and a strand of his roots stealthily slid into each of their collars, looking for beautiful landmarks. This perverted Ginseng is beyond help. Although you're in a humanoid form, you're only as large a child's arm. What can you do? Ling Han shook his head as he thought this. Anyhow, what had Li Weiwei and Ji Yuner come for? Damn blockhead, you actually dared to keep me in the dark. Li Weiwei immediately jumped to her feet upon seeing Ling Han enter. This caused the old Ginseng to grimace in pain. One of his roots had been on her chest, and he hadn't been able to pull it back in time. Thus, it was ruthlessly snapped when she jumped up. Li Weiwei didn't realize it, yet Ling Han saw it clearly. He secretly smiled to himself. Who told the old Ginseng to act so perverted? Anyhow, this root would be good compensation for Li Weiwei. The roots of this old Ginseng were extremely nutritious. Ling Han had only taken one to eat, and he had left the others, stored, on the old Ginseng. Li Weiwei had unknowingly obtained one now, and it would definitely be extremely beneficial to her cultivation and physique. Ling Han smiled, and said, "How did you find out?" "Hee, I didn't believe that Sister Shui was the type of person who'd cheat. So, I kept pestering the 9th king with questions." "It didn't take long for her to spill the beans," Li Weiwei said smugly. Sure enough, Hu Feiyun couldn't keep any secrets. She was a clone of Empress Luan Xing, and her personality was one that was severed from the Empress. Thus, it was inevitable that there would be some deficiencies in her personality. Meanwhile, some of her other traits would be magnified significantly. For example, the innocence and ditziness of Hu Feiyun were both traits that had been severed from Empress Luan Xing. These had only been a tiny portion of the Empress personality, yet they were the entirety of Hu Feiyun's. "Blockhead, how are you planning to respond?" Everyone's talking about how you killed fellow disciples and stole their treasures. Li Weiwei quickly moved on from how Ling Han had kept his identity hidden and instead started to worry for him. Ling Han smiled, and said, "It's fine. I'll deal with whatever gets thrown my way." "What can't I deal with?" "What a bold claim," Li Weiwei said with a humph. However, she felt much more reassured after seeing Ling Han's oozing confidence. Ling Han had come from the chaotic star's majestic empire, after all, and he had come across all kinds of dangers. However, he had overcome all of them. Feng Peyun, Ding Ping, and the others also came to visit him. However, they were all reassured and sent away by Ling Han. He would deal with this matter himself. However, he couldn't find any time to cultivate in the following several days, with Xiao Sisi, Xia Wuk, Su Jing, and the others all visiting him. They all hinted at their willingness to help him as long as he joined their forces. If he agreed to join, they would do everything in their ability to help him. Ling Han smiled and turned down their goodwill. He had no plans to join any forces. Why was he cultivating so earnestly? Wasn't it to attain true freedom so he could do what he wanted? Afterward, He Tao and the other king tiers also came to visit him. Their offers were similar to those of Xiao Sisi and the others, and they all hoped that Ling Han could join their forces. A significant reason for this was Ling Han's non-existent background. He had come from a small world after opening the sky, and thus he had absolutely no background in the immortal realm. As such, they didn't need to worry about him being a spy for some other force. Ling Han naturally turned down their offers as well. It was also around this time that a piece of news suddenly started to spread. The sect was apparently discussing the matter regarding Ling Han killing his fellow disciples. There was potentially going to be a public trial in a few days. Gao Huang was finally making his move. On the same night that this news broke, a Sun-Moon tier elite appeared before Ling Han's palace. "I'm Zhou Tong." This Sun-Moon tier elite looked to be around 30 years old, and it was clear that he had already formed 2 suns and moons. His strength was fairly formidable. There was a haughty look on his face, and he said, "I've come at the command of young master to give you one final chance. Immediately hand the 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid over. Otherwise, you'll become an unforgivable traitor of the sect. You'll be pinned to the post of humiliation forever." Ling Han smiled, and said, "You could have chosen to be a respectable Sun-Moon tier elite, but no, you had to choose the life of a dog. How dare you?" Zhou Tong exploded in rage, and divine flames instantly erupted from his body. Ling Han waved his hand, and said, "Don't get all angry at me. You've merely cultivated for a few 100,000 years more than me. You want to make a bet? I'll be powerful enough to crush you in 10 years' time." Ling Han's words were extremely bold and domineering. A Mountain River tier cultivator was claiming that they would possess the ability to crush a Sun-Moon tier elite in 10 years' time. Who could believe this? However, Zhou Tong's pupils contracted when he heard this. Judging by the freakish nature of this brat, it was genuinely possible that he could achieve this. Anyhow, he didn't believe this claim too much. He humphed, and said, "If you don't hand the 1000 source true fluid over, you won't even be able to overcome the challenge before you. That being the case, what future is there for you to speak of?" Ling Han smiled calmly. He had the pill recipe for the Berserk Blood Spirit pill, and he also had a Red Rain Divine King tree in his Black Tower. Thus, he would be able to refine a great deal of Berserk Blood Spirit pills once he reached the Sun-Moon tier. One could envisage that he would improve in leaps and bounds during a certain period of time. "Go back and tell Gao Huang that if he wants my 1000 source true fluid, he can prepare enough true origin stones and attend the auction that occurs in 3 months' time," Ling Han said. This was a good opportunity to advertise the auction. Chapter 1202, The Hua faction makes their move. Zhou Tong left, bringing with him fury in Ling Han's answer. As a great elite of Sun Moon tier, he was actually threatened up front by a Mountain River tier. This made him very displeased, but who asked him to come up himself and offer himself up to be insulted? If he reported this to the sect, it would only be disadvantageous to him. As long as Ling Han was a seed, he was not someone that could be lightly insulted. The news that the Mo clan establishment would be auctioning off the 1000-source true fluid very soon caused a commotion, and this auction had also obtained the full support of the Mo clan. They had mobilized the full power of the clan to advertise this matter. Thus, very soon, the news had spread all over the entire galaxy. Even a great many elites of heavenly body tier were attracted. The 1000-source true fluid was formed from an elite of the Eternal River tier, containing comprehension of the heaven and earth of this level. Even for heavenly body tiers, this was a precious treasure. It might not be able to make a cultivator at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier break through to the Eternal River tier, but it was still very possible for it to help one in the low extreme of the heavenly body tier to break through to the medium extreme, or one in the medium extreme to advance into the high extreme, and so on. And what did this kind of advancement mean? A revolutionary change would take place in one's abilities, and his lifespan would also be increased by another 10 million years. 10 million years. With such a long period of time, perhaps he could obtain a new fated opportunity, and advance into a higher cultivation level. Thus, not only Sun Moon tiers were moved, even a great many heavenly body tiers had begun to set out towards Flying Cloud Planet. This was also the reason why the auction was scheduled for 3 months later. It was to allow enough time for the bankrollers to come. Of course, the Mo clan had also invited some alchemists. This group was the true rich group. For the sake of an ancient pill recipe, they would definitely place a high bid that would make one gape in shock. Ling Han did not need to do anything. He had already delegated the full responsibility for arranging the auction to Hanhua. He would only have to hand over the 1000-source true fluid and other items over to Hanhua on the day of the auction. Did not hand them over yet, because the goods would be safest with Ling Han. Because of how valuable the 1000-source true fluid was, the auction had instantly become the hottest topic of conversation. However, the movement from the Gao faction was also getting bigger and bigger. Obviously, they were planning to subdue Ling Han before the auction itself. Otherwise, if the goods were already on the stage of the auction, they could only compete with their wealth. However, the Majestic Heavens sect was not a place that the Gao faction had full control of. Senior Brother Han. On this night, a guest came to pay him a visit. Fan Ru led the guest in. She was an enchanting and exquisite beauty, with a voluptuous figure and so bewitching that she could have been dripping water. She curtsied to Ling Han, and said, "I am Ji Yunji. Junior sister Ji. What is it?" Ling Han asked casually as if he had completely not realized that the person standing in front of him was a vixen that could make anyone's heart throb and face blush. Fan Ru, who was standing on the sidelines, dared not look directly at Ji Yunji, afraid that even his spirit would be hooked. Ji Yunji was surprised. She was naturally very clear how enchanting she was. This was not only because she was naturally beautiful, and had also deliberately gone the route of becoming more seductive later. It was also because the cultivation technique she was cultivating would allow her to be even more dazzling and bewitching. Every move she made would be exuding seduction. But Ling Han actually did not even look at her directly, which was something she could not accept. Usually, men would want nothing more than to have their eyes glued to her, but Ling Han was the complete opposite. He seemed too lazy to even cast a second look on her. She calmed herself, and said, "I am here by command of Hua Yangwen, young Master Hua, hoping to ask for a small favor from Brother Ling and see if you could sell a drop of 1000-source true fluid to the Hua faction." Hua faction? Ling Han gave an "oh." After he had made an enemy of the Gao faction, he had conducted his own investigation, and knew that there was a disciple called Hua Yongning who was ranked 6th among Venerable Trinity's 9 disciples. Then this Hua faction was naturally formed by Hua Yongning. Additionally, Xiaofan was ranked 4th among the 9 disciples. Though this was only in the order in which they took him as master, in a certain way, it was also the power ranking of their respective factions. Young master would definitely not allow senior brother Ling to make a loss. Ji Yunji smiled sweetly. What young master means is, senior brother Ling needs only auction off 3 drops of 1000 source true fluid, and young master would purchase a drop at the same price as the lowest successful bid among these 3 drops. This indeed could not be considered a loss to Ling Han, because if the 4 drops of 1000 source true fluid were really auctioned off together, then the cheapest drop might be sold lower than the lowest successful bid in the case of 3 drops being auctioned off together. After all, the smaller the supply, the fiercer the competition would be. For my sake, the Hua faction would turn hostile with the Gao faction? Ling Han asked. Any faction is filled with competition. As the saying goes, the weak are prey to the strong, and survival of the fittest reigns supreme, Ji Yunji said calmly. Among the Venerable's 9 disciples, only one would be able to obtain the final true inheritance, and shoulder the great responsibility of leading the majestic heaven sect. So, even if it is not for the sake of senior brother Han, the battle between the Hua faction and Gao faction is inevitable. Ling Han nodded. The lower ranks had their own competition, and the upper ranks would also have the struggle of the upper ranks. How much envy would the inheritance of eternal river Tyr garner? If one obtained it, he might perhaps be capable of conquering this whole universe, and become the only ruler. How many people would be able to resist this kind of temptation? No wonder those 9 disciples all formed their respective factions. Their aim was to increase their own stakes so they could obtain the inheritance. However, Venerable Trinity had not made his stand clear all this while, and even had plans to take Yang Hao as his 10th disciple. This was actually giving off the signal that Venerable Trinity was not very satisfied with these 9 disciples. Even though the 9 disciples were all fighting fiercely now, when the time came, it could be completely wasted effort, and they wouldn't be getting anything. Ling Han smiled. What relation did this have with him? He pondered for a moment, and then said, "All right. I can retain a drop of 1000 source true fluid for young Master Hua." In any case, it was no loss to him. Senior brother Han is truly a man of firm temperament. I shall first offer my thanks on behalf of young master. Ji Yunji stood up, and curtsied again to Ling Han. Her head and neck was low, revealing the snow white of her breasts. The part that swelled was voluptuous and grand. What a seductive beauty that could ignite flames. Ling Han's expression was serene. Constantly being seduced by a great vixen like Shui Yenyu, he had naturally gained a strong immunity. Furthermore, in comparison with the exquisite beauty and charm of Empress Luan Xing, Ji Yunji was only on the level of a village girl. How could he possibly be disturbed? Ji Yunji raised her head, and when she saw that Ling Han's expression was calm, without the slightest sign of his heart beating faster or being breathless in excitement, she couldn't help but feel extremely curious. According to her understanding, Ling Han should have reacted by now, and embarrassed himself and become obedient in front of her. Then she would be able to get the upper hand psychologically. If she then set out some conditions, Ling Han would agree without the slightest hesitation due to his flustered state. Did this guy not like women? Ji Yunji was making her guesses internally, but it was naturally impossible that she would ask this question out loud. She continued talking, and took advantage of the opportunity to seduce Ling Han a few more times, but all her attempts ended in failure. Thus, she could only leave helplessly. What nice breasts! Old Ginseng popped up from who knew where, looking like it was gritting its teeth at Ling Han. That little asterisk was obviously seducing you, so why didn't you just take her? Even if you wouldn't, you should still have had her take off her clothes so you could allow this Grandpa Ginseng to have an eyeful. Get lost. Ling Han shot out a kick. This perverted ginseng was definitely incurable. Chapter 1203, Turning Hostile. The Hua faction had great power. From the second day onwards, there were already people talking about the truth on the Eagle's Beak Mountain, about how Ling Han had obtained 4 drops of thousand source true fluid all by himself and created history. In truth, this was something that had been talked about long ago, but it had immediately been buried underneath the public opinion that was universally against Ling Han. However, now with the Hua faction moving, it was like how the Gao faction had easily presented Ling Han as an executioner who killed others to steal their treasure, having as much impact on the people as the previous rumor. The vast power of the Hua faction was naturally not something that could be matched by any individual entity. Even when such young king tiers like He Tao and Shenjur spoke up, it was useless. How could they match the force that had been nurtured for tens of thousands of years by the Hua faction and Gao faction? Now that the Hua faction and Gao faction had started their contention, it was naturally impossible that the public opinion would be so one-sided anymore. Instead, it was the clash of two voices. One was smearing Ling Han's reputation, whereas the other was establishing a positive image of Ling Han. What the truth was actually not important. What was important was which of these two factions was stronger. Unexpectedly, a new faction very soon joined in. The Hu faction. The founder of the Hu faction was the 9th disciple of the Venerable Trinity. His name was Hu Xiangdi. He did not have any children, and the young master of the Hu faction was his only disciple. Her name was Lei Linglong, an outstanding beauty. The Hu faction's inclination was to beat down on Ling Han. Actually, by now, Ling Han's matter was no longer important. This had become a stage for the disciples of the Venerable Trinity to show off their power. They were all fighting over the only qualification to obtain the true inheritance, and all wanted to trample over the others. Or in other words, they were making use of this matter to kick a few people out of their way. Ling Han was a fuse, and the joining in of the Hua faction had announced the beginning of this battle. Next, more disciples of the Venerable Trinity joined in. The Tai faction, Lang faction, Nya faction, Jian faction, Lu faction. Out of the 9 great disciples, 8 disciples had already joined in, and now the situation just happened to be 4 against 4. Now, it was the only remaining Chu faction that had yet to make their position clear. Who would have thought that a mere mountain river tier disciple would actually be capable of triggering a fierce battle among the 9 great disciples, and that they would display their respective abilities? But the Hua faction's condition had also changed. Previously, the condition that Ji Yunji had set out on behalf of the Hua faction was being willing to spend an exorbitant amount to purchase a drop of thousand source true fluid, and in exchange, they would help Ling Han dissolve the oppression from the Gao faction. But when the Tai faction, Nya faction, and Lu faction also joined into the alliance, Ji Yunji came to see Ling Han again. Apologies, to oppose the alliance of the Gao, Lang, Jiang, and Hu factions, young master was forced to pull in the other 3 factions for help, but they could not possibly offer their aid for no reason. Ji Yunji smiled apologetically. Young master said that we hope that senior brother Han could take out all 4 drops of thousand source true fluid. Seeing Ling Han's expression darken, she hurriedly continued, naturally, young master would not treat senior brother Han badly. We can purchase it at 1 million true origin stones per drop. Are you committing burglary? Ling Han almost laughed out loud. Previously, when he had been selling alchemical pills at the Chaotic Star's majestic empire, he had earned more than 2 million true origin stones, and now, a drop of thousand source true fluid could actually only sell for 1 million? This was a treasure that even heavenly body tiers would prize greatly. Your young master is a real joker. Ling Han shook his head. He finally understood. What Hua faction and Gao faction? In truth, they were no different, it was just a dogfight. And he had actually placed his hopes on the Hua faction. He had really been too naive. Ji Yunji was also feeling guilty, but how could she possibly not do as young master commanded? She stretched out a hand to press down on Ling Han's palm, and said, "Senior brother Han, young master Hua will use other means to compensate you." Ling Han withdrew his hand, and said, "He, please keep a respectable distance, junior sister Ji. I, too, shall offer you a word of advice. A man that can treat you like an item to be freely gifted. Would he really be worth entrusting your whole life to?" Ji Yunji's beautiful face couldn't help but shift expressions drastically. Hua Yangwen had commanded that she could sacrifice some of her charms as the situation required to placate Ling Han. In her heart, she was naturally unwilling, but she dared not disobey his command. Now that Ling Han had pointed it out openly, she almost wanted to die in her fury and shame. "There is no need for senior brother Han to worry about my matters," she said coldly. "Just one word. If you hand over the 1000-source true fluid, you can obtain me. Undress. Undress. Undress." Old Ginseng suddenly popped out. This guy's eyes was already shining brightly. When he heard such seductive words, how could he possibly continue resisting? He had scrambled out from who knows where. "Girl, take off your clothes first, and let Grandpa Ginseng examine you. Get lost." Ling Han shot out a foot, and old Ginseng was instantly sent flying. "Ah!" Old Ginseng screamed out. "Brat, you are kicking me to the curb when I'm no longer useful. You are having the lion's share, so can't you save some scraps for Grandpa Ginseng? A man cannot be so disloyal, you petty brat. You hide all the good stuff for yourself, Grandpa Ginseng *** you." A muscle twitched involuntarily in Ji Yunji's cheek. And what the heck was this? Ling Han waved his hand dismissively, and said, "Go back, and you won't have to come again in future. Since young Master Hua is insincere, then our previous agreement will be completely considered nullified. Senior brother Han." A sinister expression appeared on Ji Yunji's face. "Since you have already offended the Gao faction, if you continue to offend our Hua faction, you would progress with great difficulty within the sect." You speak as if the whole world belongs to you guys," Ling Han said carelessly. "If you speak a few less words now, I will only detest the Hua faction at most. But if you continue to garner my dislike, the Hua faction will also be on my list of future targets. I can also offer you a warning. Those listed on my list of targets definitely will not reap any nice fruits." A confident smile appeared on his face. There would be a day when he would stride over the heavenly body tier to become eternal river tier, and by then, even if Venerable Trinity moved, he would not be able to stop him from seeking justice from the so-called Gao faction and Hua faction. The Rain Emperor, Feng Peyun, Ding Ping. Which one of them was not a genius in his own right? As long as they were given enough time, they would even be able to punch a hole in the heavens. They should not take unfair advantage of him just because of his youth. Ji Yunji couldn't help but yield in the face of Ling Han's forcefulness. After a long while, she finally said, "Since senior brother Han is obstinately clinging to his own course, I will report this to young master as it is. Excuse me." She turned and left. Since their negotiation had soured, there was naturally nothing else that needed to be said. It would only cause their relations to become even worse. "Brat, you are practically too stupid. Since there was a girl that willingly offered to take off her clothes, why didn't you just go ahead?" Old Ginseng ran back, a perverted expression all over his face. Ling Han sighed, and said, "You have really reincarnated into the wrong body. Since you love to watch people undress so much, why don't you go and stay at the public baths?" He. The old Ginseng released a series of mischievous snicker. "How do you know that Grandpa Ginseng hasn't gone there?" "Fuck, this perverted Ginseng." Ling Han shook his head, too lazy to squabble with him. Now that he had also pushed out the Hua faction, then even if the Hua faction and the other factions did not fall in with the Gao faction, there were still as many as 4 factions targeting Ling Han. Now that things had come so far, the arrow was already notched. No matter if Ling Han had committed a crime or not, they would all have to crucify Ling Han. Otherwise, the 4 factions would all lose face. One Gao faction was already capable of suppressing Ling Han to the point of suffocation, what more when there were now 4 factions? Chapter 1204, Day of the Auction. There were still 47 days until the auction. Obviously, the Gao faction would definitely not allow the auction to proceed, because once the 1000-source true fluid had been auctioned off, the buyer would either be an elite of the heavenly body tier or a force that had the backing of one. No ordinary person would have that kind of wealth. And in the face of elites of the heavenly body tier, the Gao faction would firstly be too embarrassed to try to snatch the treasure, and secondly, they might not be successful either, unless Venerable Trinity moved personally. But if Venerable Trinity had been willing to move, there wouldn't have been an auction in the first place. Hence, the Gao faction would definitely have to rush against time to deal with Ling Han before the auction started. In that case, the 1000-source true fluid would be theirs. As for how the 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid were to be divided, and how Ling Han would be finally dealt with, that was their internal business. In short, they had to first snatch the 1000-source true fluid. These few days, I have already discovered that there are people keeping a surveillance in secret. Looks like the Gao faction is finally going to make a true killing move. No need for a few days, and the sect would put me on trial. Though this seems like farce to me, this is a world where only the strong rule in the first place. Now that the Hua faction has shrunk back, unless Venerable Trinity spoke up, this battle would not be easily fought. Ling Han was pondering deeply. Even he had not foreseen that things would have progressed to this level. At the time, he had only given his full effort in battle just for the sake of safeguarding his own treasure. He had not predicted that this would have given the Gao faction an opening to raise difficult questions and place the deaths of Shi Ming and the others on his account as well. Though this matter was indeed slightly related to him, it had been the Gao faction provoking him in the first place. It couldn't possibly be that since you were about to rob me, I would have to smilingly surrender my treasure, right? Then what was the point of cultivation? He might as well just become a coward. Though that's the fact, how should I actually survive this ordeal? Ling Han considered for a very long time, and finally came to a decision. No matter if it is the Gao faction or the Hua faction, what they want is the 1000-source true fluid. Then, from this day onwards, I will stay in the Black Tower and not come out. I will drag it out all the way until the day of the auction, when I will rid myself of the 1000-source true fluid. Then, the pressure I face would be considerably smaller. Perhaps only Gao Huang would be biting at me at that time like a mad dog. Ho ho, Gao Huang, though we have never met, you should be very honored to become the first person that I want to kill before even meeting him. Ling Han smirked coldly. He was forced so far that he could only stay in the Black Tower for his own safety. Naturally, he was furious. After sending Fan Ru off to Hu Feiyun's, Ling Han informed Ding Ping, Feng Peiyun, Shui Yenyu, and the others, telling them not to come and look for him these few days. Then, he entered into the Black Tower, and continued to cultivate the star-plucking step. However, 2 days later, the Gao faction could no longer bear it, and used a killing move. They summoned Ling Han for a trial to investigate the truth behind the deaths of Shi Ming and the others. Yet Ling Han had disappeared. This move caught the Gao faction unprepared. They searched Ling Han's quarters thoroughly in the name of the sect rules, yet they still did not manage to find him. This drove them crazy. To prevent Ling Han from fleeing, they had already had people stand guard at the doors. As soon as Ling Han left, they would be putting him under surveillance. Yet the person who was on surveillance duty solemnly vowed that Ling Han had definitely not left the palace. But where was he now? How had he disappeared? Ling Han had not been sentenced yet. Thus, as a seed, he could naturally come and go as he pleased. This was not against the rules of the sect. Hence, the Gao faction could not treat Ling Han as a criminal and stick up wanted posters for him everywhere. This was extremely interesting. To list Ling Han as a wanted criminal, they had to first prove that he had committed a crime. Yet Ling Han did not appear, so the trial could not be carried out. Then, he was innocent, and this was a complete cycle. Thus, the Gao faction could only mobilize their own forces to search for Ling Han in secret. The other factions might also have joined in as well, but they ultimately could not command the whole sect and launch a search on a greater scale. Meanwhile, Ling Han was leisurely cultivating in the Black Tower. He had enough alchemical pills and true origin stones. Even if he was in the Black Tower, it did not affect his accumulation of origin power, and as he underwent comprehension underneath the reincarnation tree, it was natural that his grasp of the regulations of this heaven and earth would be greatly improved day by day. When the day that the auction would begin came, Ling Han quietly advanced into the peak stage of the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier, and had become qualified to become a match for an opponent in the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier. I have never been this powerful before, he murmured to himself. No wonder Shenjuer and the others had been so confident previously. If they had exhibited their full power, they could have indeed suppressed him easily. Of course, suppressing him was one matter, and wounding him was another. As for the star-plucking step, I have also grasped a bit of it. Cooperating with the present level of my origin power, I can definitely experience a short burst of speed that would surpass the majority of Sun-Moon tiers. It's time to go to the auction. He exited the Black Tower, calmly opened the doors, and came out. Pooh! Seeing him suddenly appear, the eyes of the person in charge of surveillance outside almost popped out. Even his brain short-circuited. They were keeping a watch here, but it was merely routine business. After all, they had searched the palace a considerable number of times before. Who would have thought that Ling Han would actually come out from inside? When they saw Ling Han, they only felt as if they had seen a monster. Thus, it was only when Ling Han had walked quite some distance away that they came back to themselves, and shouted, "Stop right there." Ling Han smiled. "Just because you said so?" Not only did he not stop, he instead ran even faster. "Quick, send out a signal quickly." "We've found Han Lin," one of the people on watch duty said. The other person nodded hurriedly, and drew out a signal bomb. Pa! A Gao letter instantly appeared in the skies. This was the unique communication method of the Gao faction. Suddenly, elites of the Sun-Moon tier appeared, and quickly rushed over. Additionally, there were even more Mountain River tiers that had rushed here. However, they were much slower. When they found out that Ling Han had appeared, they were both pleased and shocked. Their pleasure was because Ling Han had finally appeared, and their shock was due to the fact that today was the day of the auction. This brat must be rushing to deliver the goods to the auction. Cut him off. Old you, will move separately. I will pursue by following the traces of that brat while you head directly for the auction, an elite of Sun-Moon tier said. All right. The other person nodded. Two great elites of the Sun-Moon tier were moving separately. They had absolute confidence that whichever of them moved, they would be able to easily subdue Ling Han. The one in pursuit of Ling Han was precisely Zhu Tianqiu. Previously, he had experienced a loss in Ling Han's hands in secret, so he would naturally bear a grudge against Ling Han. He wanted to apprehend Ling Han personally, and put him in a little bit of suffering first. Zhu Tianqiu's speed was extremely fast. Though Ling Han circled and turned here and there, attempting to hide the traces, how powerful were the senses of the Sun-Moon tier? He pursued him the whole way, and in a short while, he could already catch sight of Ling Han's back. Ha ha ha, Han Lin, there is no way you can flee, he declared wickedly. Ho ho, you are threatening me again. Have you forgotten the lesson from last time? Ling Han asked smilingly. Zhu Tianqiu almost exploded in anger. This brat actually dared to still speak of the matter from previously? He released a furious roar, and his feet suddenly sped up as he raced towards Ling Han. Brat, don't even think of running away this time. That may not be the case. Ling Han sped up as well. Xiao, he burst into a terrifying speed, which was actually not the slightest bit slower than Zhu Tianqiu's star-plucking step. Chapter 1205, Failure? Zhu Tianqiu was astonished. Ling Han was merely in the mountain river tier, yet the burst of speed actually made him faster than even him. Was this possible? However, even if he didn't want to, he had to believe this. Not only did the gap between himself and Ling Han not shorten, it was instead widening endlessly. So fortunate, he thought. Previously, it had indeed been wise of him to have the other person stand guard to wait for Ling Han at the auction grounds. Otherwise, the two of them would only be able to sigh helplessly as they followed Ling Han fruitlessly. Yet Ling Han knew he would not be able to maintain such speed for long. This was a little like the ultimate arrow, though it was not as exaggerated. For a short time, he could burst with a terrifyingly fast speed, and he could maintain this kind of high speed more or less for about 6 or 7 minutes. And this was taking into account the fact that he had not completely grasped the star-plucking step. If he could completely understand the true essence of this movement technique, the burst of speed would be even greater. Soon enough, Ling Han's speed had decreased. However, he had already arrived at the foot of the mountain, and the small town had appeared in front of him. There was just a little bit of distance he had to cover. Han Lin, will you still not halt? A cold humph sounded, and a Sun-Moon tier elite appeared, standing in Ling Han's path like a god descended. Whether I halt or not, what relation does that have with you? Ling Han's figure flashed, intending to make a turn and pass. What a joke. You see, am standing guard here, and you still think you can pass? This Sun-Moon tier smirked coldly, stretching out a hand to grab Ling Han. He was in the late stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. As he delivered this attack, a sun and moon flickered, exuding a terrifying aura. This was not the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, where there would be restrictions in place to target power above the level of Sun-Moon tier. Ling Han clenched his fist, and shot out a punch. What? Are you planning to seek death? Yu Si was internally surprised. A mere mountain river tier would actually dare oppose a Sun-Moon tier. Where had he gotten such outlandish courage from? He gave a humph, yet still drew back some of his power to avoid killing Ling Han with a single blow. As long as his crime was not proved and he himself sentenced, Ling Han would be a seed of the majestic heaven sect. Yu Si could only invite him back for the trial. If he crippled Ling Han or even killed him, then he would have to pay a corresponding price for his actions. A fist landed on the giant descending palm, and suddenly, a frightening shock wave was generated. Pung, 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 pung. The mountain rocks around them were all shattered by the force. An expression of disbelief appeared on Yu Si's face. Ling Han's punch actually blocked his attack. This. The peak stage of the pinnacle level. You have actually cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. His astonishment was indescribable. The pinnacle level belonged to the territory of king tiers, but even so, it was not every king tier that could cultivate to the peak of the pinnacle level. This was the pinnacle level, and in this cultivation level, every step forward was incredibly difficult to take. Just how old was Ling Han? Yet, he had already cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. Furthermore, the peak stage of the pinnacle level meant that his power could surpass a major tier. Presently, this brat's power was equivalent to that of the early stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. Wuxia was actually in the late stage of the low extreme, yet because he had feared killing Ling Han with a single strike, he had held back some of his power, causing the power on both sides to actually be more or less equal. No big deal. You do not have to admire me so much, Ling Han said, smiling. Even if you are in the peak stage of the pinnacle level, so what? That is only equivalent to the early stage of the low extreme. I will still be able to easily suppress you. Wuxia said. That was good too. He could use his full abilities, and needed not worry that he would mistakenly kill Ling Han, implicating himself as well. He used the power of the Sun-Moon tier, and all the divine patterns on his body lit up, exhibiting his full battle prowess. Brat, today I will let you know that the difference between Mountain River tier and Sun-Moon tier is not merely in terms of power, but also the grasp we have of the Tao of heaven and earth. He, too, delivered a punch. The divine patterns interwove densely together, forming a terrifying might. Ling Han took it head-on, yet was immediately sent flying, blood gushing from all over his body. He got back up with gritted teeth. The other had spoken true. The Sun-Moon tier was not only stronger than Mountain River tier in terms of power, but also in the level of comprehension of the regulations of this heaven and earth. He had cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and in theory was only inferior to his opponent by 2 stars of power, but added with the regulations of heaven and earth, this gap was extraordinarily wide. Why was it said that 10 stars of power would be able to match the early stage of the low extreme of Sun-Moon tier? That was because this kind of Sun-Moon tier had just crossed over into this new territory, and their comprehension of the regulations was more or less equivalent to the peak stage of the pinnacle level. Come with me back to the sect obediently to undergo the trial. Wuxia moved again. He opened his mouth, and spat out a giant brown bird. The bird spread its wings, and flew towards Ling Han. This was a giant beast. When its wings stretched out, they were 300 meters long, and it was completely covered with divine patterns. This was completely an attack that was formed from the regulations of heaven and earth. Ling Han did not take the attack forcefully. He had already tried, and the other's battle prowess was indeed superior to his. If he took it head-on, he would only be seeking his own suffering. He began to roam around in battle by using the star-plucking step. Though it no longer enabled him to have super speed, he could move in an erratic manner, which did not allow Wuxia to lock on him. Thus, his attack could not possibly exhibit the might that it should have had. Wuxia, however, was not impatient. Zhu Tianzhou should be able to arrive soon. The latter was in the peak stage of the low extreme. He would be able to take Ling Han down single-handedly, what more when joining forces with himself. He would only have to detain Ling Han, and not allow the latter to go to the auction grounds. He was sure that Ling Han could not possibly have handed over a treasure like the 1000-source true fluid to the Mo clan establishment ahead of time who would be able to do so without worrying. True enough, in a short while, Zhu Tianzhou had arrived. His burst of speed was indeed not as fast as Ling Han's, but its merit was that he could use that kind of speed for a long time. Thus, he had arrived only slightly later than Ling Han. Let us see where else will you go. Zhu Tianzhou's face was slightly flushed. He, a powerful elite of the Sun-Moon tier, actually allowed a Mountain River tier to get away from him. How humiliating. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "All right, I will follow you two back to the sect." Zhu Tianzhou and Wuxia suddenly felt uncomfortable, just like they had just thrown a punch into empty air. At first, they had wanted to properly create some difficulties for Ling Han, but who would have thought Ling Han would have been so decisive? However, since Ling Han had not been able to enter the town, he naturally couldn't have handed the 1000-source true fluid over to the Mo clan establishment, and they could be considered to have successfully completed their mission. "Let's go then," the two said, their expressions dark. Ling Han did not look the slightest bit frustrated, causing Wuxia and his companion much confusion. Ling Han's plans had obviously failed, so why was he still so calm? They couldn't see through him. The trio headed towards the main peak. One elite of the Sun-Moon tier was walking in front and the other walking behind, with Ling Han sandwiched between them. They had condensed their origin power, but did not take any action. They would be able to burst out with the strongest blow at any moment to prevent Ling Han from running away. Yet Ling Han had completely no plans to flee. He smilingly asked, "Are you guys wondering why am I still so calm and serene now that I have completely failed and obviously not handed over the 1000-source true fluid to the Mo clan establishment?" Both Yu Si and Zhu Tianqiu were internally baffled. This was indeed the source of their confusion, yet these words had come so calmly and leisurely from Ling Han's mouth, giving them a very bizarre feeling. "Humph, since you know that you have completely failed, you should obediently hand over the 1000-source true fluid. You have to know you are completely incapable of protecting so much divine fluid with your abilities," Yu Si declared coldly. Ling Han smiled slightly, and said, "Haha, I know that you have placed my friends and disciple under surveillance. However, in truth, I am merely bait. Now that I have appeared, you would all come to chase after me. That disciple of mine should have already handed over the goods to the Mo clan establishment by now." Chapter 1206, Speaking Without Bounds. What? Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si almost jumped up in astonishment. Ling Han was only bait? Why were they targeting and chasing Ling Han? Although he had offended and disobeyed Gao Huang, this wasn't enough reason for the Gao faction to spend so much effort targeting him. The most important reason was the 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid. However, he had actually handed these to the Mo clan establishment to auction. That being the case, what did it matter whether they captured Ling Han or not? They had been screwed over. "You look like you've eaten dead children," Ling Han said with a chuckle. "You have to understand that the 1000-source true fluid was mine to begin with. Yet, you people are so worried about it now. Should I thank you guys?" His voice was full of ridicule. He had handed the 1000-source true fluid and other auction items to Ding Ping before he went into seclusion. Moreover, he had correctly guessed that the Gao faction would monitor the people close to him. Thus, he had used himself as bait to draw all of them over. It was only natural that they fell for his trick. Ling Han, their main target, had appeared, so shouldn't they pursue him? "You must be lying," Zhu Tianqiu roared. He had already been screwed over by Ling Han once. If he was screwed over again, he wouldn't be able to raise his head anymore. It would be far too humiliating. "That's right, you're definitely trying to scare us into hurrying back," Yu Si said. "That way, you'll be able to escape." Ling Han shrugged his shoulders, and said, Only losers will stubbornly believe that they haven't lost yet. Alright, it's time to leave. It's about time that this farce came to an end. I don't want to carry a non-existent accusation, even if it's only a suspicion." Zhu Tianqiu and Yu Si exchanged a glance. It was already too late to return to the Mo clan establishment. Their only option was to capture Ling Han and bring him back. That way, they would have at least accomplished their task. After a short while, they arrived at the White Jade Palace, which was located on the main peak. This palace was cut from flawless white jade. This was where the sect interrogated people and determined their innocence or guilt. After learning of Ling Han's return, several elites instantly hurried over. They would act as judges. There were 5 elites in total, and they were all at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. Heavenly Body tier elites naturally wouldn't come to interrogate a measly Mountain River tier cultivator. After all, who had so much spare time? If this was the case for Heavenly Body tier elites, then it was obviously more so the case for Eternal River tier elites. Venerable Trinity spent almost all of his time cultivating. He barely ever came out of seclusion. However, were elites at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier not enough? Apart from the one Eternal River tier elite and 24 Heavenly Body tier elites, this was the most powerful force of the Majestic Heaven sect. This was a force to be reckoned with, even when casting one's eyes over the entire galaxy. Han Ling, are you not going to kneel before us? One of the judges roared. He was called Shen Kuo, and he was the head of the 5 judges. Thus, he was naturally seated in the middle. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "This disciple hasn't broken any sect rules, so what am I being accused of? Moreover, I'm a seed, so I don't have to kneel before you, am I correct? Heh, my respects to you, seniors." He clasped his hands in front of him and nodded at the 5 judges. This was his respectful greeting. "What an arrogant brat," another Judge Ma Ge exclaimed. His eyes were very narrow, and there was a strangely feminine feel about him. "Youth, that which is too hard snaps easily. Those who are too arrogant never meet with good fate." "Oh, are you talking about Yang Hao?" Ling Han chuckled, and said, "He's indeed very arrogant. He's already at the Sun-Moon tier, yet he's still targeting cultivators at the Mountain River tier. He's ignoring the rules of the sect, yet he actually went unpunished even after causing such a great commotion. There's truly no justice." Pooh! The 5 judges almost exploded in rage. "You're pretty fucking good at spewing sh*t, aren't you?" Yang Hao was indeed very arrogant. However, he was a 1 in 1,000,000 years prodigy. In fact, there was even a chance that Venerable Trinity would choose him as his successor. Thus, he had the right to be arrogant. Moreover, hadn't Yang Hao been severely beaten by the Empress already? Even his life essence had started to drain, and his lifespan had decreased by at least several hundred years. Visit on our novel full. Although a few hundred years wasn't significant to Heavenly Body tier elites, it wasn't insignificant either. When they neared the end of their lifespan, even a period of a few hours would be extremely precious, let alone a period of several hundred years. Yang Hao hadn't caused a fuss after suffering this fate, yet Ling Han was standing here and taking jabs. Where was the justice? Shen Kuo coughed loudly, and said, "Han Lin, stop trying to deride others. The aim of this trial was to determine whether Ling Han was innocent or guilty. So, what reason was there to talk about others?" His expression became cold, and he asked, "Do you understand your crime?" "Understand what crime?" Ling Han retorted with a smile. "During your time in the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm, you slaughtered the Gao faction's Shi Ming as well as his companions. Not only that, but you even stole their 1000-source true fluid." Shen Kuo's voice was frosty, and he even unleashed his Sun-Moon tier aura toward Ling Han. Unfortunately for him, Ling Han's divine sense was extremely sturdy and tough thanks to the tempering from the indestructible Heaven Scroll. Moreover, he had even refined a remnant wisp of demonic power source. Thus, if one wanted to suppress his divine sense, they would need to be at least Genesis tier elites. As for Sun-Moon tier elites, they weren't powerful enough. Ling Han stood proudly, and said, "What Gao faction? I've never seen it before. In fact, I've never even heard of it." Utter drivel. Ma Gai humphed, and said, "If you don't have a guilty conscience, why did you disappear for several months and make it impossible for others to find you? You truly like to joke. Isn't it extremely normal for cultivators to cultivate in seclusion?" Ling Han smiled, and continued, "Perhaps you make a special report to the sect before you go into seclusion?" Ma Gai was instantly rendered speechless. Of course disciples could go into seclusion as they pleased. However, the timing of Ling Han's seclusion was far too coincidental to be an accident. No matter how one looked at it, it was clearly the action of a criminal escaping prosecution. Shen Kuo waved his hand, and said, "This is a fair and just trial to determine whether you're guilty or innocent. So, we still haven't used any instruments of torture on you yet. The sect definitely won't torture you into making a false admission. However, we won't allow criminals to lie their way out, either. Senior is so just. Ling Han exclaimed with a smile. However, there was strong flavor of sarcasm in his voice. Shen Kuo really wanted to slap him to death. However, he could only suppress his urge upon thinking of Ling Han's identity as a seed. Anyhow, were it not for the fact that Ling Han had come from a small world and didn't have any background, how would they dare to target a seed? Which seed didn't have the support of heavenly body tier elites? The situation surrounding Ling Han, the Rain Emperor, and Ding Ping was extremely unique. 3 seed-level geniuses had actually come from the same small world. Shen Kuo composed himself and said, "You're innocent for the time being. However, there's still a dispute regarding which party the thousand-source true fluid belongs to. So, I'll have to ask you to hand over the thousand-source true fluid first. If it truly belongs to you, we'll naturally return it later." After saying so much, their true aim was still the thousand-source true fluid. This was to be expected. If it were Ling Han alone, the Gao faction definitely wouldn't spend so much effort and resources. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, "Senior, are you trying to say that the thousand-source true fluid was obtained by that crap faction or whatever? Heh, you're quite the joker. How could those weaklings have obtained the thousand-source true fluid? 4 drops, no less. Oh, that's right. I heard that Yang Hao also obtained 2 drops before. If that crap faction obtained 4 drops, doesn't that mean that they're even more powerful than Yang Hao? Weaklings?" Shen Kuo and the other judges all winced upon hearing this. In reality, they were all members of the Gao faction. Although Ling Han hadn't called any names, he had effectively called all of them weaklings in his sweeping statement. He was a measly mountain river tier cultivator, yet he had pointed at their noses and called them weaklings? How could they accept this? What a toxic brat. Chapter 1207, Mastermind finally appears. Ling Han spread his hands with a smile, and said, "To be honest with you, I've already handed the thousand-source true fluid to the Mo clan establishment to auction. So, you can all stop thinking about it now. If you don't believe me, you can go out and ask around. Based on my understanding of you people, I trust that you already have people at the auction. In fact, it's about time that they report back. Go on, keep interrogating me. Although the innocent will remain innocent no matter what, there's always those who try to pour dirty water on others. I'm also extremely pissed off." Shen Kuo, Ma Gai, and the other judges all wore dark expressions. Did this brat really think that he was here as a guest? He was far too calm and composed. However, if what he said had been true, then they would really have been screwed over. They looked toward Zhu Tianqiu and you see. Cold sweat instantly dripped down the 2 men's foreheads. If young master failed to obtain the 4 drops of thousand-source true fluid, they would definitely have to shoulder a significant portion of the blame. The faces became as white as a sheet when they thought of Gao Huang's torture methods. It was as if they had become extremely sick. "Han Lin, what gall you have!" Shen Kuo roared in anger. The ownership of the thousand-source true fluid is still under dispute, yet you actually put it up for auction. Are you blatantly opposing the sect? Ling Han smiled, and said, "Stop spewing such utter nonsense. The 4 drops of thousand-source true fluid are mine no matter how you want to paint the situation. If you don't believe me, you can ask all of the mountain river tier cultivators in the sect to attack me. That way, you'll see whether or not I'm able to defeat all of them by myself, no? Anyhow, your accusations are completely baseless. In fact, let's talk about Sherming and the others. Since you've accused me of killing them, where are your witnesses and physical evidence? They couldn't have told you in your dreams, right? Pooh. A few ordinary disciples who were maintaining the order outside the palace instantly spluttered with laughter. However, this wasn't the public trial, so there was no one standing around and watching. Thus, these disciples barely had anything to do. Shen Kuo's expression became extremely dark. He had never dreamed that a day would come when he would almost explode in anger due to the words of a mountain river tier cultivator. After all, it was almost impossible for such a situation to occur. Which mountain river tier cultivator dared to speak back to Sun Moon tier elites? Moreover, what did matter if they spoke back? If they did, the Sun Moon tier elites could simply smack them to death. What could the mountain river tier cultivators do about this? However, he truly couldn't smack Ling Han to death at this moment. First of all, he couldn't confirm whether the 1000-source true fluid had truly been handed to the Mo clan establishment to auction. If he smacked Ling Han to death, and it turned out that he was hiding it somewhere, he could sit tight and wait for Gao Huang to kill him. Second of all, Ling Han was still a seed. As long as he retained this status, it would be beyond his authority to kill him. Thus, Shen Kuo could only suppress his anger. Pang! The door of the White Jade Palace was suddenly pushed open at this moment. In fact, it was probably kicked open. The person at the door was still in a kicking posture. This was a slender youth who appeared extremely handsome. However, a terrifying aura radiated from his body, and the pressure that it exuded caused many of the people present to have difficulty breathing. It was as if they were being choked. Our respects to young master. Shen Kuo and the others immediately stood up and bowed respectfully to the youth. Meanwhile, the Mountain River tier disciples instantly kneeled down in greeting. This person was Gao Huang. Ling Han turned around to look at this opponent he had never seen before. He needed to remember this person's appearance lest he accidentally killed the wrong person in the future. Gao Huang wore an angry expression as he strode into the hall. He humphed coldly, and said, "What are you trash even doing? I received a report that a drop of 1000-source true fluid has already been auctioned." The appearance of this drop meant that the remaining 3 drops were also in the hands of the Mo clan establishment. Shen Kuo and the others remained silent, just like cicadas in the cold. Although they were Sun Moon tier elites, they were like little children before Gao Huang. There was nothing they could do about this. Gao Huang wasn't weaker than them, and his status was far above theirs. Moreover, his father was an elite at the peak stage of the heavenly body tier. Who would dare to provoke him? In any case, they were all members of the Gao faction, so how would they dare to disrespect their young master? Gao Huang turned his gaze to Ling Han, and said, "You immediately head to the auction house and stop the auction." "Oh? Why should I?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Because I command you to do so," Gao Huang said haughtily. "Dumb C*NT. Ling Han snorted. "Why you dare to scold me?" Gao Huang shouted in fury. Ling Han shrugged his shoulders, and said, "If you're not a dumb C*NT, why did assume I was talking about you? If you are a dumb C*NT, then I'm merely telling the truth. If telling the truth is equivalent to scolding, then I've really got nothing to say." Gao Huang instantly exploded in rage. He had never seen someone curse another person so righteously before. He humphed, and said, "You're acting so arrogant even though you're in an interrogation hall. What a rare sight. However, don't forget where this is." What are you all standing there for? Continue the interrogation." Shen Kuo and the others all looked at each other. Hadn't they been interrogating Ling Han before? It was the sudden arrival of Gao Huang that had interrupted the trial. Yet, Gao Huang was actually blaming them. However, did they dare to grumble in complaint? They weren't Ling Han, nor were they as courageous as him. "Han Lin, no matter how many excuses you come up with, you won't be able to escape the chains of justice." Shen Kuo returned to his seat before slamming the table, and saying, "Invite the witnesses." It wasn't long before several people walked out from the back of the hall. They were all youthful disciples at the Mountain River tier. "Did you witness Han Lin killing Shiming and the others?" Shen Kuo asked. "We did, Senior," the Mountain River tier disciples said, nodding respectfully. Shen Kuo turned to Ling Han, and asked, "Han Lin, do you have anything to say?" Ling Han laughed loudly, then pointed at one of the youths, and said, "Let me ask you, what technique and weapon did I use to kill Shiming?" The youth was rendered speechless. They hadn't prepared an answer to this. "What? You witnessed me killing them, yet you have no idea how I killed them?" Ling Han smiled, and said, "Is there something wrong with your eyes? Hold it. Don't answer my question yet." Ling Han waved his hand at the youth, then turned to the other disciples, and said, "Since you all witnessed me killing Shiming, tell me together, what weapon did I use to kill him? There's no need to hurry. I'll count to 3, and you can all answer together. 1. 2. Enough." Shen Kuo roared. "Han Lin, how long are you going to muck around for?" Ling Han was astonished, and he said, "Am I not proving my own innocence? Anyhow, this is a very simple question, is it not? Since they witnessed me killing them, isn't it well within my rights to ask them what technique and weapon I used?" "Humph. You're threatening the witnesses," Shen Kuo said sharply. How would I dare to threaten the witnesses before Sun Moon tier judges? I don't have the power to do that even if I wanted to." Ling Han's voice was calm, and he continued, "Then I may as well remain silent. Will that satisfy you, seniors?" What an argumentative person. There was a long laugh, and a person appeared before the door of the palace. No, there were 2 people, one in front and one behind. The person standing in front was a handsome youth, was no less handsome than Gao Huang. Moreover, his strength was likely no weaker either. The aura that radiated from him was also suffocating. Ling Han didn't recognize this person. However, he immediately guessed his identity upon seeing that the person behind him was Ji Yunji. He was Hua Yongwen, the young master of the Hua faction. Chapter 1208, A Gathering of Villains. "Hua Yongwen, why are you here?" Gao Huang asked with a humph. This isn't your house, so why can't I be here?" Hua Yongwen was naturally unafraid of Gao Huang. They were both descendants of disciples of an Eternal River tier elite, and they were both the young master of their respective faction. Their status was identical, their cultivation level was identical, and their strength was also identical. Gao Huang stared at Hua Yongwen. He had already lost the 1000 source true fluid, so he was naturally beside himself with fury. Right now, he wanted to take his anger out on Ling Han. Thus, the worst thing that could happen was if someone stepped out to protect Ling Han. Hua Yongwen pointed at Ling Han, and said, "Don't worry, I didn't come to protect him." Killing intent flashed across his eyes. Gao Huang instantly came to a realization. The Hua faction had evidently made a deal with Ling Han before, and it was because of this deal that they had helped him. The 1000 source true fluid had most likely been an integral part of this deal. Otherwise, why would Hua Yongwen have been so fervent? However, after a while, the Hua faction had suddenly stopped helping him. This was undoubtedly because their deal had fallen through. In other words, the Hua faction had given up on Ling Han. Thinking carefully, the Hua faction hadn't prevented them from listing Ling Han on the interrogation list. In fact, they had even encouraged this. From this, it could be seen that the Hua faction also wanted to capture Ling Han. It was just that they were hiding in the background and out of sight. In order to interrogate a seed, they needed support from over half of the 24 heavenly body tier elites. Thus, if the Hua faction wanted to protect Ling Han, they could have easily prevented him from entering the White Jade Palace. Of course, they would definitely have to pay a price for this. Anyhow, everyone had wanted to snatch the 1000-source true fluid from Ling Han's hands. It was just that the Gao faction had been the most active and fervent. If the Gao faction had succeeded in obtaining the 4 drops of 1000-source true fluid, the Hua faction, Hu faction, and other factions definitely wouldn't have sat on their hands. They would have all stepped in to take a slice of the cake. This was inevitable. After all, Ling Han was a soft target. Brilliant. It's fine as long as he's not here to protect Ling Han. Gao Huang nodded, and said, "We already have all the witnesses and evidence, so hurry up and deliver the judgment. Strip him of his identity as a seed." Hua Yongwen wore a faint smile as he watched on. This measly mountain river tier cultivator had actually dared to reject him. How foolish. He had especially come here to witness Ling Han's suffering. He wanted to see his expression of anger and remorse. Ling Han looked at them coldly. This was a gathering of rats and snakes so it would be useless no matter how he explained himself. All he could do was speak a few words of ridicule. However, nothing he did would change the end result. Of course, this was unless a powerful elite stepped in to help him. However, such a possibility was incredibly slim. Ahem. There was an awkward expression on Shenqua's face. He was the main judge, yet he was being commanded like a dog by Gao Huang. He forced a serious expression onto his face, and said, "Han Lin, there's irrefutable evidence that you killed your fellow disciples. I hereby announce that, from this moment on, you're stripped of your identity as a seed and stripped of your identity as a disciple of the Majestic Heaven sect." Pa! He slammed the table heavily. You committed the abhorrent crime of killing fellow disciples. According to the rules of the sect. Ha ha ha. Shenqua was just about to announce further punishment, yet Gao Huang had already started to laugh loudly. Gao Huang's laughter cut him off, and he could only shut his mouth awkwardly. Han Lin, do you regret your decisions now? Gao Huang's voice was cold, and he continued, you're a measly mountain river tier cultivator, and you're more so a bumpkin from a small world. Yet, you actually dared to oppose me? Are you worthy? Do you have the right? I'm going to give you one final chance. Kneel down and beg me for forgiveness. Perhaps I'll be lenient and spare your life. Ling Han shook his head, and said, Gao Huang, you truly haven't disappointed me. You really are a cold and heartless person. Didn't you say that I killed Sherming? Yet, you'll actually spare me if I kneel down and kowtow to you. Aren't you afraid of alienating your subordinates? Sure enough, the expressions of Shenqua and the others changed when they heard this. Gao Huang paid no heed to this. In his mind, apart from his father, other people were all lackeys and dogs that acted on his command. If they were disobedient, he would simply kill them. The most abundant resource in this world was lackeys. So, why did he need to care? He laughed loudly, and said, this is your only way to avoid death. Become my dog, and I'll spare your life. Keep dreaming. Ling Han shook his head, and said, the only person who'll be kneeling and kowtowing is you. Preposterous. Gao Huang seethed. He truly didn't understand where Ling Han was getting his confidence from. He had already lost his identity as a seed, and he was a mere lamb for slaughter. Ling Han swept his gaze over Gao Huang and Hua Yongwen, and then said, I've already remembered your appearances. It's best that you remember what happened today. I'll return within 10 years to repay this debt. He had already decided to enter the Black Tower and leave the Majestic Heaven sect. After 10 years, he could perhaps become a heavenly body tier elite. At that time, he would return to exact revenge. He wasn't overly worried about Ding Ping, Shui Yanyu, and the others. After all, they were all disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect. Even if Gao Huang wanted to target them, he would need to frame them first, just as he had done with Ling Han. However, timing and opportunities were integral when trying to frame someone. Ling Han wouldn't give them this chance. He had already discussed this with Shui Yanyu and the others, and they had all gathered at the Mo clan establishment today. If things went awry, they would immediately leave together. He was only one step away from reaching the Sun-Moon tier, so it was about time that he went to search for the Rock Palace, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, and the others. This was a decent opportunity to leave. Moreover, he had already asked the Mo clan establishment to help him search for the Rock Palace and the 5 sects. Once there was information, he would immediately set off. "Heh, you're still as arrogant as ever." Another voice traveled over, and a deity-like man walked into the palace. A long shadow was cast by his tall figure, and it was as if people could only kowtow under his shadows. It was Yang Hao. "Oh, our respects to Uncle Yang." Gao Huang and Hua Yangwen exchanged a glance before greeting Yang Hao respectfully. "What? Uncle Yang?" One had to realize that Gao Huang and Yang Hao were both at the peak stage of the Sun-Moon tier. Meanwhile, Yang Hao was only the high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. So, why were they referring to him as a senior? Unless Uncle Yang officially became the 10th disciple of the Grandmaster yesterday. Gao Huang explained. He was someone who cared about face, so he naturally explained why he had referred to Yang Hao as Uncle Yang. Now that he had become the 10th disciple of the Venerable Trinity, Yang Hao's status had changed completely. Even though his cultivation level was still low, even heavenly body tier elites would have to treat him with the utmost respect. One could disrespect Yang Hao, but could they disrespect Venerable Trinity? If one held themselves in higher regard than Yang Hao, wouldn't they be claiming to be on the same level as Venerable Trinity? Who in this galaxy had the right to claim this? Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events. Although there had been rumors floating around, who could read the mind of an Eternal River tier elite? Now that Yang Hao's status had been confirmed, everyone was naturally stunned. Sure enough, Yang Hao had become the 10th disciple of Venerable Trinity. Yang Hao's status rose so dramatically that he was on equal standing with heavenly body tier elites. A faint smile appeared on Yang Hao's face as he looked at Ling Han. However, there was terrifying killing intent hidden in the depths of his eyes. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.